Story 1, 600 fathoms. The sleet came in sideways off the port rail and found the gap between my collar and my neck, same as it had every haul since we left Kodiak. I stopped noticing it around day 3. Nobody tells you that about the cold up there. It doesn't stay sharp. It gets into you and goes dull, like a tooth that's been aching so long you forget it isn't supposed to hurt. My hands had been wet for 11 days. The skin on my knuckles had split and healed and split again, and I quit looking at them. We were hauling the 3rd string of the morning, and the sun wasn't up, wouldn't be up for another hour, and the deck lights threw everything into that hard white that makes a man look like he's already dead. Boots was on the roller, gaffing fish as they broke the surface and swung up over the rail. I was baiting the next set, elbow deep in a tote of chopped squid and herring that had gone the color of an old bruise. Sten worked the coiler. The line came up out of the water in a long, steady climb, dripping, and the black cod came with it, one every few feet, their mouths working, their eyes big and flat and gold in the light. Sablefish, black cod, we called them, though they aren't cod at all. They live deep, that's the whole trick of it. You set your gear on the bottom in 600-700 fathoms of water, which is more than half a mile straight down, and you leave it to soak. And then you come back and you pull up 1.5 miles of ground line with 1,000 hooks on it, and you hope the fish found it before the sleeper sharks did. The fish come up from a place where there's no light and no warmth and pressure that would fold a man flat as a beer can. They come up so fast their stomachs push out of their mouths. You get used to that too. I'd taken the season because I was $3,100 behind on child support, and the state of Oregon had started sending letters with words like garnishment in them. That's the short version. The long version has my ex-wife in it, and a lawyer, and a Ford F-250 with a transmission that started slipping in October, and my daughter Michaela, who was 9 that year and had asked me on the phone in February whether I was going to come to her school thing in the spring, and I'd said I'd try, knowing I wouldn't. Knowing I'd be 1,000 miles out in the Gulf of Alaska with my arms in a squid tote when whatever her school thing was happened without me. A guy I knew from the mill, Rennick, had done 2 seasons on a longliner out of Kodiak and come home with better than 20 grand each time. He gave me a number to call. That was the whole plan. Call a number, fly to Alaska, freeze for 6 weeks, come home square with the state, and maybe a little ahead. I want to be fair about the boat, because later on it would be easy to make her sound like she was cursed from the start, and she wasn't. The Marta Dawn was a good boat. 92 feet of steel out of a yard in Anacortes, built in 1979, repowered twice since. She smelled like diesel and bleach and fish and the particular sourness of 6 men who'd been living in a space smaller than a 2-car garage for 11 days. The galley was warm. The bunks were narrow, but they were dry, mostly, and after a 19-hour day on deck, a dry bunk is close enough to heaven that you stop asking for the real thing. Captain Emil Rask ran her, and had for going on 19 years. He was maybe 60, thin as a fence rail, with a face that had folded itself into a permanent squint from looking at cold water and bad light his whole life. He smoked Winstons one after another in the wheelhouse with the window cracked an inch so the cabin wouldn't fill up, and he almost never came down on deck. He didn't have to. He watched us on the camera and he talked to Sten on the deck radio, and he knew, somehow, from up there in his warm chair, exactly what the gear was doing before it broke the surface. Guys who'd fished with him a long time said Rask could feel the bottom through the hull. I thought that was just the kind of thing men say about a captain they trust. Later I wasn't so sure. Sten Arnes was the deck boss. He was Norwegian, or his people were, from someplace up the coast, and he'd been longlining since he was 15 years old, which by the year I'm telling you about was closer to 40 seasons than 30. He had white hair and a white beard and forearms like mooring lines, and he moved on a pitching deck like the deck wasn't moving at all, like the whole ocean was something happening to other people. He didn't talk much. When he did, you listened, because it was usually the difference between keeping all your fingers and not. Boots was Marcus De Leon, from Bellingham, 30-something, quick and loud and funny in the way that a good deckhand has to be, or he'll lose his mind out there. He'd gotten the name because he showed up his first season in a pair of cowboy boots. City kid, no idea, and the crew never let him forget it. He could gaff and swing a 40-pound fish over the rail all day and keep up a running commentary the whole time about his ex-girlfriends, about a bar in Dutch Harbor, about a fish that looked at him funny. On a boat, a guy like Boots is worth his weight. He keeps the deck loose. He keeps you laughing when your hands are cracked and bleeding and there's still 9 hours of daylight left to burn. Then there was the kid, Cody Frine, 19 years old, first season. A greenhorn out of some town in the Idaho panhandle that didn't have any water bigger than a reservoir. He'd never seen the ocean before he flew to Kodiak. He got sick the first 3 days, puking over the rail between hauls and then getting right back on the gear, which is more than a lot of guys manage, and Sten had noted it without saying anything, which from Sten was high praise. The kid was all knees and elbows and eagerness. He wanted to do everything right. He called Rask Sir until Rask told him to knock it off. He had a girl back home and a picture of her taped inside his bunk, and he talked about her the way you talk about something you're scared of losing. And down in the engine room there was Halvard, the engineer, who I didn't see for whole days at a stretch. He lived down there with the Maine and the hydraulics and the reek of hot oil, a big, slow, soft-spoken man who came up to the galley to eat and then went back down into the noise. 6 of us. That was the whole world for 6 weeks. 6 men in a steel box and the water underneath. I'm telling you all this so you'll have them straight in your head, because it matters later who these men were. The morning I want to start with was the 12th day. We were fishing a spot Rask had marked years back, out past the shelf where the bottom drops off into the deep basin, and the numbers had been good. Not great, but good. We'd been averaging maybe 1,500 pounds a string, decent fish, market size, and Rask was happy in the flat way he got happy, which is to say he stopped talking about the weather window and started talking about how many more sets it'd take to fill the hold. The wind was out of the southeast at 25, gusting 30, and the swell was running 8-10 feet, long and slow, the kind of sea that isn't dangerous, just tiring. The Marta Dawn rolled through it with a rhythm you learned in your knees. Up on the swell, hang a second at the top, down into the trough, the deck tilting so the wash ran to the low rail and back. You worked with it. You baited on the down roll and you gaffed on the up. After 11 days, your body did it without asking your brain. We'd hauled 2 strings clean. The gear came up the way it's supposed to, hook after hook, most of them with fish, some of them empty or with just the bait torn off, and now and then a hook with nothing but a fish head on it. The body taken by a sleeper shark down in the dark before we ever got there. That's normal. Sleeper sharks are slow, ugly, cold-blooded things, blind half the time from parasites that eat their eyes, and they'll follow a long line and strip it if they get the chance. You lose fish to them every season. You curse, and you rebait, and you keep hauling. The 3rd string is where it started, though I didn't know it was starting. Nobody ever does. The line came up out of the black. Sten watched it come. Boots stood at the rail with the gaff, loose, easy, waiting for the first fish, and the gear came up empty. Not empty like the sharks had been at it, empty like it had never fished at all. Hook after hook after hook, clean, the bait gone off every one of them. No fish, no heads, no torn gangions, nothing. Just a mile of line coming up bare with the little snoods swinging in the wind, and the bait stripped so clean the hooks looked polished. Sleepers, Boots said, but he said it like a question. Sten didn't say anything. He watched the line come and his face didn't change, but I'd been on deck with him long enough to see that he'd gone still inside, the way an animal goes still. The line kept coming, 200 hooks, 300, every one of them bare and bright. That ain't sleepers, I said. Because it wasn't. Sharks make a mess. They take the fish and leave the head, or they take half and leave the gangion snapped and curled. They tear things. This was clean. Every hook picked bare like something had gone down the line in the dark, patient, deliberate, and taking the bait off each one the way you'd shell peas, and there wasn't a mark on the hooks. Whatever did it hadn't so much as scratched the steel. Sten reached out and stopped the hauler. The line hung there, dripping, going down into the water at a long slant, and for a second the only sound was the wind and the diesel throb under our feet and the wash running back and forth across the deck. Then Rask's voice came out of the deck radio, tinny and small. "Why'd you stop the gear?" Sten keyed the handset. "Coming up empty," he said. "Whole string. Bait's gone off every hook. No fish." There was a pause, long enough that I looked up at the wheelhouse windows, where I could see the orange coal of Rask's cigarette moving in the dark behind the glass. "Empty how?" Rask said. Sten looked at the line a moment longer. "Clean," he said. Another pause. The cigarette moved. "Bring it up," Rask said. "All of it. Let me see the end of it." Sten started the hauler again. The rest of the string came up the same, bare and bright, hook after hook, the whole mile of it, near 1,000 hooks, and not one fish, not one head, not one torn snood. Boots stopped standing at the rail with the gaff because there was nothing to gaff. He just watched it come, and the funny had gone out of him. The kid, Cody, stood by the coiling table with his mouth a little open, looking from the line to Sten and back, waiting for one of us to explain it so he'd know how worried to be. The end of the string came up last, the last anchor, the last buoy line, the big inflatable ball we called the high flyer, all of it fine, all of it the way it should be, so the gear hadn't parted. It hadn't dragged. It had sat on the bottom in 600 fathoms exactly where Rask set it, and it had fished for 11 hours, and something had gone down the whole length of it in the dark and cleaned every hook and left the steel shining. We stood there a minute. The boat rolled, down in the trough, up on the swell. "You ever seen that?" Boots said. He wasn't asking me. He was asking Sten. Sten was coiling the last of the line into the tote, slow, careful, the way he did everything. He didn't look up. "No," he said. And that was worse than anything. That was worse than the empty hooks. Because Sten had been doing this 40 seasons, up and down the whole coast, black cod and halibut and gray cod, and there wasn't a thing the ocean did that he hadn't seen twice. Dead loss and gear wrecks and whales in the gear and killer whales stripping a string faster than you could haul it and sperm whales, even, way out deep, big bulls that had learned to run a long line like a buffet. Sten had seen all of it, and he said no. Rask had us rebait and reset over the same ground. That's a captain for you. Whatever it was between him and the fish were down there, and we had a hole to fill and a weather window closing behind us. So we baited 1,000 hooks with squid and herring, and we set the string back down into the dark, snapping the Gangians onto the ground line as it ran off the stern, the anchor going over with a splash, the high flyer bobbing away astern in the gray light that was finally starting to come up in the east. Cody worked next to me on the bait table. He was quiet for a while, which wasn't like him. Then he said, "What do you figure did that?" "Sleepers," I said, because it was easier than the truth, which was that I had no idea. Sten said it wasn't. Sten's an old man. Old men like a mystery. Cody didn't laugh. He snapped a Gangian and looked out at the water, at the high flyer getting small astern, and he said, "It's real deep here, huh? Deep enough." "How deep's the deepest part?" "Out there," he nodded past the bow, out toward the west, where the shelf fell off into the basin. I didn't know exactly. Thousands of fathoms, miles. There are trenches out past the Aleutians where you could drop the tallest mountain in and it'd never break the top. I didn't tell the kid that. I said, "Deeper than the gear goes. Don't worry about it. We fished the shelf. 600-700 fathoms. It's got a bottom. Everything we pull up, it came off the bottom." He nodded like that helped. It didn't seem to, but he nodded. That night we ate late. The 6 of us jammed into the galley with the boat rolling and the plates sliding on the wet rag that kept them from going in your lap. Boots had cooked, which meant spaghetti, because spaghetti was the only thing Boots could cook, and we ate it, and it was hot, and that was enough. Rask came down from the wheelhouse, which he did once a day, to eat with us and then go back up. He had a paper chart folded on the bench next to him, and he kept looking at it while he ate, and finally Boots couldn't stand it and asked him, "Cap, that string this morning, what was that?" Rask chewed. He was a slow eater. He looked at the chart and then he looked at Boots and he said, "Current, maybe." "Bottom current comes through, tumbles the gear, washes the bait off." He said it flat, the way you say a thing you don't believe but have decided to say anyway. "Washed it off clean as that," Boots said. "Every hook. You got a better idea? I'll hear it." Boots didn't. None of us did. So we ate our spaghetti and the subject dropped, the way subjects do when a captain lets you know he's done with them. But I watched Rask fold the chart back up, and I saw that he'd marked something on it, a little cross in pencil out past the shelf edge, and next to it a number, and I couldn't read the number from where I sat, and I didn't ask. Sten didn't eat much. He went back to his bunk early. I heard him in there, before I fell asleep, doing something with his hands, some small repetitive sound, and it took me a while lying in the dark to figure out what it was. He was praying. Old Sten, 40 seasons, hard as a cleat, lying in his bunk, moving his thumb over a set of beads and mouthing something too quiet to hear. I'd never have figured him for it. I lay there and listened to it until it put me under, which is a strange thing, to be put to sleep by a hard old man praying, but I was tired the way you only get tired on a boat, all the way down, and it took me under fast. We hauled the reset string the next morning and it came up full, 1,500 pounds of good black cod, fat and market size, their gold eyes flat in the deck lights, and the whole crew let out a breath we'd been holding without knowing it. Boots got his mouth back. He was gaffing and talking, telling the kid about a woman in Homer, and Sten worked the coiler with his face gone easy again, and I baited the next set and thought, current, bottom current. Rask was right. It was a fluke. One string in 11 days. The ocean does strange things, and then it does normal things, and you forget the strange ones. I wanted to believe that. I baited hooks, and I believed it as hard as I could. The next 3 days were good fishing. We worked the shelf edge and the gear came up heavy, and Rask started saying we might fill the hold ahead of schedule if it held, and a full hold ahead of schedule meant home ahead of schedule, and home meant a check. And the check meant the state of Oregon off my back and maybe money left over to fly Michaela out in the summer like I'd been telling her I would for 2 years. So I was in a good frame of mind, is what I'm saying. We all were. You get a run of good fishing and the boat feels like a different place. Guys sing on deck. The cook makes something besides spaghetti. It was the 15th day that the second thing happened, and it was smaller than the first. So small that I almost didn't clock it, and I've thought since that that's how it works. The big wrong thing gets your attention, and then it goes quiet and lets you talk yourself out of it. And while you're busy talking yourself out of it, the small wrong things start, and they're the ones that mean it's really coming. We were hauling the second string of the morning, good fish, coming steady, and one came up on the line that wasn't a black cod. I saw it break the surface a couple of hooks ahead of where Boots was gaffing, and at first I thought it was a small halibut because it came up flat, sort of sideways, pale on the belly. But it wasn't a halibut. It came up over the rail on the hook and hung there turning in the light, and it was a fish I didn't know, and I've seen a lot of fish. It was maybe 2 feet long, pale, the color of something kept out of the sun. It had no eyes, not damaged eyes, not eyes eaten out by parasites like a sleeper shark. It had smooth, pale skin where the eyes should be, grown right over, like the fish had never had any and never needed any. Its mouth was open and full of teeth that were too long and too fine, like glass. Hundreds of them, and the mouth kept working, opening and closing, though it hung there in the air, out of the water where it could breathe. Boots looked at it. The hell is that? Deep water, Sten said from the coiler, without stopping his hands. Comes up sometimes, off the edge. Fish nobody's got a name for. That was true, and I knew it was true. Down deep there are fish that never come up, fish that science doesn't have good pictures of, anglerfish and gulpers and hagfish and things with lights hanging off them. Once in a great while, your gear brushes deep enough, or one wanders shallow enough, and you pull up something that looks like it swam out of a bad dream. It happens. It's rare, but it happens, and Sten had seen it, and it wasn't a sign of anything except that the ocean is bigger and deeper and stranger than a man in a boat likes to think about. So Boots reached out to unhook it and throw it back, and the thing bit him. It moved faster than a fish out of water has any right to. It turned on the hook and took the meat of his hand between the thumb and the first finger, and Boots hollered and yanked back, and the thing came off the hook and hung on to him for a second. Just hung there off his hand by its teeth, twisting, and then it dropped to the deck. Boots was swearing and shaking his hand, and blood was coming through the fingers of his glove, and the fish flopped on the deck plates, and Sten came off the coiler in one motion and brought his boot down on it, hard, and again, and it stopped moving. We got Boots's glove off. The bite wasn't bad, as bites go. 2 rows of little punctures, fine and deep, like he'd shut his hand in a wire brush. It bled a lot for what it was. We washed it with the deck hose, and Sten went below and came back with the first aid kit, and poured iodine in it and wrapped it, and Boots was all right, shaken but all right, flexing the hand, making a joke about it already, about how he'd tell them back in Bellingham he wrestled a monster and won. But I was looking at the fish on the deck. Sten had crushed it, and it had come apart some, and I could see inside it, and inside it there was no stomach and no guts the way a fish has. Inside it there was just more of it, more of that pale meat, and threaded through it were these fine dark lines, branching like roots, like the veins in a leaf, running all through it, and they were the wrong color for blood. They were black, and they had a faint shine to them, an oily shine, and when the light hit them, they seemed to move, just a little, just at the edge of what your eye could catch. Sten shoveled it over the side with the fish shovel before I could look closer. He did it quick. He didn't say anything about it. But he looked at me while he did it, one look, and I understood that he'd seen the black lines too, and that he didn't want the kid to see them, and that we weren't going to talk about it on deck. We finished the string. It came up good, full of black cod, and if it hadn't been for the pale thing and the black roots inside it, you'd have called it a fine morning. But my mind kept going back down the line, down into the dark under the boat, 600 fathoms of black water, and I kept thinking about what the fish had come up from and what else might be down there, and how little I knew about any of it. You work on the surface of a thing that deep and you don't think about the depth, because you can't, because the mind won't hold it. It's like standing on the roof of a very tall building. You look out, not down. You spend your whole time out there looking out, at the gear, at the fish, at the next hook. You don't look down, and now something had made me look down, and I found I couldn't stop. Boots's hand got worse that night. Not infected, exactly. The medic book we had aboard talked about infection, redness spreading, red streaks running up from a wound toward the heart, and it wasn't that. There were no red streaks. What there was that the punctures had gone dark around the edges, a gray-black, and the darkness had spread a little past the punctures into the meat of his hand, following lines under the skin. Fine branching lines, and I saw them, and I thought of the inside of the fish, and I felt the spaghetti I'd eaten turn over in me. Rask came down and looked at it under the galley light with his reading glasses on. He turned Boots's hand this way and that. He didn't say much. He told Boots to keep it clean and keep it dry, which is a joke on a longliner, keeping anything dry, and he told him to stay off the gaff for a day and let it rest. Then he went back up to the wheelhouse, and I followed him part way up the ladder, which I'd never done, and I said, "Cap." He stopped on the ladder and looked down at me. "That fish," I said. "What was inside it? You want to tell me you've seen that before? I'll believe you and go to bed, but I don't think you have." He looked at me a while. The wheelhouse was dark behind him, except for the green glow off the electronics, the sounder, the plotter, the radar sweeping its slow circle. Down in the corner of the sounder screen, I could see the bottom drawn in a hard yellow line, and the numbers next to it. The depth, 600 and something fathoms, and above the bottom, up in the water column, there were marks, fish marks, I'd have said any other day, scattered returns, little smears of color where the sounder found something between the boat and the bottom, except they weren't scattered. They were all through the water column, from the bottom halfway up, a haze of returns thicker than any school of fish I'd ever seen on a machine. And it was holding under us, holding right under the boat, and it wasn't moving off the way a school moves off. Rask saw me looking at it. He reached over and turned the gain down on the sounder so the haze faded, so the screen showed just the bottom and clean water above it. He did it the way a man closes a door on a room he doesn't want you in. "Go to bed, Wade," he said. "We're hauling at 4. I went to bed. I didn't sleep much. I lay in my bunk and felt the boat roll, and I thought about the haze on the sounder, the thing that held under us and didn't move off, and about how Rask had turned the gain down so I wouldn't see it, which meant he'd already seen it, which meant he'd been watching it, maybe for days, from up there in his warm chair with his Winstons, watching the thing under the boat and not telling any of us. We hauled at 4. It was blowing harder, out of the south now, 30 knots and building, the swell up to 12 feet and steeper, and the sky when it came gray was low and mean, no horizon, just water and cloud the same color running together. Rask talked on the deck radio about getting the gear up and running for the lee of an island to the north to wait out the worst of it. We had 2 strings still in the water. We went to get them. The first one came up bad. Not empty this time, not clean picked like the first one. This was different. The line came up out of the black and the first few hooks were normal, black cod, and then the gear got heavy. Heavy the way it gets when you've got something big in it, a big halibut or a sleeper shark or worse, and Sten slowed the hauler and we all looked over the rail into the water to see what was coming. There was a shape coming up, pale, big, coming up slow through the green-black water, resolving as it rose, and for a long moment none of us could make sense of it. And then Cody made a sound, a small, sick sound, because he'd made sense of it first. It was gear. It was our gear. It was a whole string of our own long line, buoys and anchor and all, the string we'd lost. Because we had lost one, I should have said that. On the 9th day, before any of this, we'd set a string and come back for it, and it was gone. The high flyer gone. The whole thing gone. And Rask had figured a ship had run it down in the night and dragged it off. A freighter, maybe. Cut it loose somewhere over the horizon, and we'd written it off. Dead loss. It happens. And here it was, coming up on this string, tangled into it. Hundreds of fathoms of our own lost gear balled up and knotted, and coming up out of the deep wound around the string we were hauling, as if something had gathered it up off the bottom and wrapped it around our line and sent it back to us. It took us 2 hours to deal with it. It was a mess like I'd never seen. The 2 strings knotted together in ways that didn't make sense, that no current could do. Gangions wound around gangions. The ground line of the lost string threaded through the hooks of the one we were hauling, over and under, deliberate as macrame. We cut most of it away and let it go. Rask stood in the wheelhouse door for part of it, which he never did, hood up against the sleet, watching us work, saying nothing. The lost high flyer came up last, the big orange ball, and it was fine, not fouled, not run down by any ship. The line above the anchor was cut clean, not chafed, not parted. Cut, like with a knife, 600 fathoms down. While we worked, the wind kept building and the sea kept building under it. By the time we had the mess cut away and the good gear coiled, we were taking green water over the bow, the boat burying her nose in it and shrugging it off, and Rask called it. He said, "Leave the last string, we'll come back for it when this blows through," and he put the bow to the north, and we ran for the lee of the island, the Martadon climbing and dropping through the swells with the spray coming back over the whole boat and freezing where it landed. We got into the lee by afternoon. It's a strange piece, that. You come around the back of an island and the wind is still screaming over the top of it, but the water goes flat in the shadow of the land, and the boat stops fighting, and you can stand up straight and hear yourself think. Rask set the anchor in 40 fathoms off a gray beach with no name I ever learned, and told us to eat and rest. We'd sit out the blow. Might be a day, might be 2. That was the night Sten told me the thing he told me, and I've never repeated it to anybody, and I'm only telling it now because it doesn't matter anymore. Who knows? The others were asleep, or in their bunks. Boots was in his hand wrapped and propped up, and the dark under his skin had spread up past his wrist by then, fine and branching, and he'd stopped joking about it. Cody was in his bunk too, but Cody wasn't sleeping. I'll get to Cody. Sten and I were in the galley with the lights down low and the boat rocking easy on the anchor, and Sten had a cup of coffee he wasn't drinking, and he told me about a boat called the Erland. He'd fished on her, he said, a long time back, in the late 70s, before I was born, a halibut schooner out of the same waters. And they'd worked a spot off the shelf edge, deep, and they'd started pulling up gear that came wrong, clean-picked hooks, fish nobody had a name for, a crewman who got bit and went dark under the skin, and a thing on the sounder that held under the boat and didn't move off. He told it plain, no color to it, the way Sten said everything, and every word of it matched what was happening to us, matched it so close that the coffee cup shook a little in my hands. What happened to the Erland? I said. Sten was quiet a while. The boat rocked. Somewhere in the hull, way down low, there was a sound, a long, slow sound like a wet finger dragged around the rim of a glass, and I told myself it was the anchor chain working against the roller as the boat swung, and maybe it was. They kept fishing, Sten said. The captain, he had a hold to fill. Same as now, same as always. You come all this way, you burn all that fuel, you don't go home empty because the gear's acting strange, so they kept fishing. And the strange things got less strange and more regular, you understand. It stopped being a surprise. It got to be the way things were. And the crewman that got bit, he got quiet, and then he got quieter, and then one night he went over the side. Nobody saw him do it. They just found his bunk empty and the deck door open and him gone. He jumped. I don't know that he jumped, Sten said. I know he went over. There's a difference, and I've had a lot of years to think about it, and I think the difference matters. The sound in the hull came again, the long, slow drag, and this time it didn't stop where the anchor chain would have stopped. It went on. It traveled. It started up near the bow, down under the waterline, and it moved back along the hull toward the stern, slow, and I sat there and listened to it move the whole length of the boat under my feet. Under the floor of the galley, this slow, wet, dragging sound going aft along the outside of the steel, and then it reached the stern, and it stopped. Sten was watching my face. You hear that too, he said. It wasn't a question. He'd only wanted to know if I'd hear it. Now he knew. It's the chain, I said. It's not the chain. We sat there. I wanted so badly for it to be the chain. I want you to understand how badly a man will want a thing to be the chain. Will build a whole church in his head to the idea that it's the chain. Will pray to the chain, when the other thing it might be is too big to hold. But it moved the whole length of the boat, and the chain doesn't do that. The chain is up front, at the bow. It doesn't drag itself down the side of the hull and along the bottom of the boat all the way to the stern and stop, like something feeling the shape of us, learning where the boat ended and the water began. What do we do? I said, and I hated how young my voice sounded, how much like Cody. There's nothing to do, Sten said. That's the thing I learned off the Erland, and it's the only thing worth telling. There's nothing to do. You can't fight it. You can't run from it, not really. It's under you the whole time, and the boat only goes so fast and the water is everywhere. You can't call anyone. What are you going to say on Channel 16? You going to key the mic and tell the Coast Guard there's something under the boat. They'll ask you for a description and you won't have one. And they'll ask you what it's doing, and you'll say it's dragging itself along the hull. And they'll log it and forget it, and that'll be the end of it. He turned the coffee cup in his hands. There's nothing to do but get the fish and get home and hope it loses interest. Sometimes it loses interest. The Erland, in the end, it lost interest, but not before the man went over, and not before the other thing. What other thing? But he wouldn't tell me the other thing. He said it was late. He said we should sleep while the boat was easy on the anchor, because once we went back out on the gear, there'd be no easy nights. He rinsed his coffee cup and he went to his bunk, and I heard the beads start up in the dark, the small clicking, the mouthed words, and I lay in my own bunk, and I did not sleep, because I was listening for the sound to come back, the long, slow drag down the length of the hull, and it did not come back that night, and somehow that was worse than if it had. I said I'd get to Cody. Here's Cody. The kid had changed. It had come on slow enough that I'd let it slide, the way you do, the way you let a lot of things slide on a boat where everyone's exhausted all the time and nobody's quite himself. But lying there that night, not sleeping, I made myself add it up, and it added up bad. He'd stopped talking about his girl. That was the first thing. For 11 days, he'd talked about her every chance he got, showed her picture, told us the same 3 stories about her, the way a homesick kid does. And then somewhere around the day of the pale fish, he'd stopped, all at once, like a radio switched off. And I hadn't noticed the quiet because Boots had gone quiet too by then, and the whole boat had gotten quieter, and one more silence didn't stand out. He'd stopped eating much. He pushed his food around and ate a few bites and scraped the rest over the side, and he'd started going up on deck at night. I'd heard him, more than one night, get up out of his bunk in the small hours and go up the ladder and out the deck door, and I'd figured he was seasick, or homesick, or needed air. All the ordinary reasons a young guy goes up on deck in the dark. But now I made myself remember what it had actually sounded like, and what it had sounded like was this. It had sounded like him going up and standing by the rail, not moving around, not being sick over the side. Just standing there, at the rail, for an hour, 2 hours, in the cold and the dark, looking at the water, and then coming back down and getting in his bunk without a word, night after night. And once, the night before, half asleep, I'd heard him humming, up on deck, through the deck door left open, the kid humming a tune to himself out there in the cold, and I hadn't placed the tune, and I placed it now, lying there. And when I placed it, my skin went cold all over, because it wasn't a tune. It didn't have the shape of a tune, of anything a person writes or sings. It went up and down in a way that music doesn't. It had too many notes close together, and then long slides between them, and it went on without any place where it started over, without any place where it would ever start over, and it was the loneliest, coldest sound I have ever heard a human throat make, and Cody had been standing at the rail in the dark making it, down at the water, and the water, I understood now, had been making it back. The blow lasted a day and a half. We sat on the anchor in the lee and the wind screamed over the top of the island and we slept and ate and mended gear and nobody said much. Boots kept his hand wrapped and out of sight. The dark under his skin was up to his elbow. He ran a fever the second night, sweating in his bunk, and he talked in his sleep, and I sat up once and listened to him, and it wasn't words, or it wasn't English, and I made myself lie back down and not hear it. I tried to talk to Rask about turning for home. I went up to the wheelhouse the second morning while the wind was still up, and I stood in the door and I said what I'd rehearsed, which was that we had a good load already, better than half a hold, that a man was hurt bad enough to need a doctor, that we could run for Kodiak and offload and count ourselves lucky. I said it all reasonable. I didn't say anything about the sound in the hull or the humming or the haze on the sounder, because I knew how it would land. Rask listened to all of it, smoking, looking out the window at the gray water. When I was done, he was quiet a while. Then he said, "You know what I owe on this boat?" I didn't. "I know what you owe the state of Oregon," he said, "because Rennick told me, because that's why he sent you. 3,100 and change. You want to go home with that still hanging on you. You want to fly all the way up here and freeze for 2 weeks and go home owing the same money you left owing." He tapped his ash out the window crack. "We fill the hold, you go home square and ahead. We run now with a half hold, you go home behind. I go home a lot more behind than you. So we're going to finish the trip. He looked at me finally. His eyes were wet and old and I couldn't read them. It leaves us alone if we don't bother it. That's been my experience. You bother it, you look at it, you go poking at it, it takes notice. You keep your head down and fish and it stays what it is, which is a thing under the boat that you can't do anything about anyhow. So keep your head down, tell the kid to keep his head down, and we'll be home in a week. That was the most I ever heard Rask say at one time, and I understood two things from it. I understood that he'd known, all along, more than any of us, and I understood that he'd made his peace with it in a way I never could, a captain's peace. The kind that comes from doing the math on a boat you'll lose if the season goes bad. He decided the thing under us was a cost of doing business. He decided you could fish alongside it. And the terrible part is that he wasn't wrong, exactly. That was his experience. He'd fished these waters 19 years. Maybe he'd felt it before, the drag on the hull, the haze on the sounder, and kept his head down and gone home fine. Maybe there were whole seasons where it noticed the boat and got bored and sank back down and the crew never knew a thing. Maybe that was most seasons. Maybe that's why nobody talks about it. The ones it lets alone don't have a story to tell. But he was wrong about one thing. He thought we could all keep our heads down. He didn't know about Cody. He didn't know the kid had already looked, had already been standing at the rail in the dark answering the thing note for note. Cody hadn't kept his head down. Cody had leaned all the way over the rail and looked straight into it, and it had looked back, and it had started the slow work of bringing him in. The wind laid down on the second night, and we pulled the anchor before dawn and went back out to the grounds. The sea was still up but workable, long swells, gray light. We steamed back to the ground where we'd left the last string, and it was still there, the high flyer bobbing, and we started to haul it. And I want to tell you what came up, but I need to tell you about Cody first, because Cody is the part I've spent the years since trying to put down and can't. He was good on deck that morning, better than he'd been in days. Sharp, quick, present, snapping gangians and swinging fish, and I let myself feel good about it. I let myself think the kid had slept it off, whatever it was, homesickness, the fever going around, and he was back. He even smiled at me once across the bait table, but it was wrong, the smile, and it took me a second to see why, and then I saw it. It was too calm. There was no worry in it. For 11 days the kid had worn his worry right out on his face, worry about doing it right, worry about his girl, worry about the fish, and the cold and the captain. The ordinary worry of a young man in over his head, and now the worry was just gone. He was smooth and calm and easy, and he smiled at me across the tote of squid, and his eyes, when I made myself look at them, his eyes were flat and gold and a little too big, and they didn't have any light behind them, and I thought, without wanting to, of the black cod coming up out of the deep with their eyes gone flat and gold in the deck lights, the pressure of that dark place still on them, dying in the air. The last string came up, and on the last string, down near the end, there was Cody's girl. I don't mean her, I mean her picture. The picture the kid had taped inside his bunk, the one he'd shown us 100 times, a girl on a porch squinting into the sun with a dog beside her. It came up on the longline, hooked through, sodden, 600 fathoms of cold black water it had no way to have gotten to, hooked onto our gear on the bottom of the sea. And Sten stopped the hauler and reached out and took it off the hook, and he looked at it, and then he looked back over his shoulder at Cody, who was standing very still at the coiling table with that flat gold calm on his face, looking at the picture in Sten's hand and not at all surprised to see it. "Kid," Sten said, real quiet, "Cody." And Cody smiled his smooth smile and said, in a voice that was almost his own and not quite, that had something under it like the humming, like too many notes too close together, he said, "She's down there. She's been down there the whole time. They all are. It's warm down there. You'd be surprised. Everybody thinks it's cold, but it's warm. It's warm all the way down, and there's so much room." Nobody moved. The boat rolled. The gear hung in the water off the roller, dripping. Then Rask's voice came out of the deck radio, and it was different than I'd ever heard it. It was fast. It had fear in it, and Rask didn't have fear. Rask had made his cold peace with the whole thing, and now his voice came out of the little speaker fast and scared, and he said, "Get him inside. Get the kid inside right now and put him in his bunk and shut the door, and one of you sit on the door. Do it now." We moved. Boots was down in his fever, so it was Sten and me. We took Cody by the arms, one of us on each side, and he didn't fight us. That was the worst of it. He came easy, smiling, humming low in his chest, and his arms under my hand were cold. Cold the way the rail was cold. Cold like he'd already been down in that warm place he talked about and brought the cold of 600 fathoms back up in his skin. We walked him to the deck door and down the ladder and back to his bunk, and he lay down in it like a child being put to bed, still smiling, still humming, and Sten pulled the little curtain and we stood there in the passage. "Somebody has to stay on him," Sten said. "He's not going anywhere. He's in his bunk. Somebody has to stay on him," Sten said again, and I heard under the flat of his voice the thing he wasn't saying, which was the man on the Erland, the empty bunk, the open door. So I said I'd stay. I got a stool from the galley and I sat in the passage outside the kid's curtain, and Sten went back up to finish the gear with Halvard come up from the engine room to take a place on deck. And I sat there in the low light and listened to Cody hum behind the curtain, and I watched the deck door at the top of the ladder to make sure it stayed shut. I sat there a long time. The humming went on, that tune that wasn't a tune, and under it I could hear the boat working, the diesel, the hydraulics, the sea against the hull. And after a while, under all of it, I heard the other sound, the long, slow, wet drag. It came up near the bow, down below the waterline, and it started back along the hull toward the stern, slow, patient, and this time it was on both sides at once. I could hear it on the port side and the starboard side, both, two of them, or one of them big enough to be on both sides at once, dragging itself down the length of the boat in the dark under the water. And when it came even with where I sat, right there under the floor of the passage, Cody stopped humming. The quiet was worse than the humming. I sat and I stared at the curtain, and I did not want to pull it back, and I made myself pull it back. He was lying there with his eyes open, flat and gold and too big. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking up, past me, at the deck above, at the water beyond it, and he was smiling, and his lips were moving, and no sound was coming out, and I understood he was still humming. He'd just gone somewhere I couldn't hear it anymore, some place where the tune didn't need his throat to carry it. And under his skin, all up his neck and along his jaw, the dark had come, the fine branching lines, the roots, the same as boots, the same as the inside of the pale fish, black and faintly shining and moving just at the edge of what the eye could catch. "Cody," I said, "Kid, stay with me. We're going home. You've got the girl back home, remember? On the porch, with the dog. We're going home to her. Just stay with me." His eyes came to me then, slow, and for 1 second, there was something behind them. The kid, the real kid, Cody Frine from the Idaho Panhandle who'd never seen the ocean. And he looked at me out of all that cold, and he was so scared, and he said, in his own voice, "Small, I don't want to. Wade, I don't want to go. Don't let me go." "I won't," I said. "I've got you. I'm right here." And I meant it. God help me, I meant it. And I did everything a man can do, which is nothing, because there's nothing to do. Sten told me that, and he was right. I sat with the kid, and I held his cold hand, and I talked to him about home, about summer, about warm things, and the dark spread up under his skin, and sometime in the night, with me sitting right there awake with my hand around his, he went, not over the side. There wasn't any over the side, not from his bunk, in the middle of the boat with me on the door. He just went. His hand in mine got colder, and then it wasn't a hand anymore. It was just cold, and his eyes were open and gold and empty, and the dark had filled him all the way up. And whatever had been, Cody wasn't in there, and I never felt him leave. There was no moment. He was just gone, poured out of himself and down through the hull and into the warm dark where he said there was so much room. I don't remember much of the next part clean. I remember yelling. I remember Sten coming down the ladder. I remember Rask's voice on the intercom. I remember that we didn't put Cody over the side, that Sten wouldn't let us, that we wrapped him and we put him in the fish hold on the ice with the black cod because Sten said whatever was in the water wanted the body and we weren't going to give it the body. And I remember thinking that was madness, and then thinking it wasn't, that nothing was madness anymore, that the world had come apart along a seam I hadn't known was there, and everything that spilled out of it was just the way things were now. And I remember the storm. It came up out of the southwest with almost no warning, faster than any weather I've been in before or since, the barometer falling off a cliff, the wind going from 30 to 60 in under an hour, the sea standing up into gray walls with the tops tearing off them white. Rask turned the boat into it and we ran. We quit the grounds and we ran for Kodiak with the throttle wide open and the Marta Dawn climbing those walls and falling off the backs of them, burying her bow to the house. The whole boat shuddering, green water over everything. It was the real thing. Any other season it would have been the worst thing that happened to me. That storm, the one I'd tell people about. That season it barely made the list. Because the thing came up in the storm. I saw it. I'm the one who saw it, because I was in the wheelhouse with Rask, the two of us wedged in there in the dark with the electronics glowing green and the boat standing on end, and I saw it on the sounder first. The haze came up off the bottom, the way it had, but it didn't stop halfway up the water column this time. It came all the way up. It filled the whole screen from the bottom line to the surface, a solid mass of return. Everything the sounder could see between us and 600 fathoms down was one thing, one body, rising. And Rask looked at it, and he didn't turn the gain down this time. There was no point, and he said the only thing left to say, which was, "Hold on." And I looked out the wheelhouse window into the storm, into a trough between two waves lit up by our own deck lights, and the water in the trough wasn't water. For 1 second before the next wave came and buried it, the whole trough was pale. Pale and vast, going down and down, the color of a thing kept out of the sun, and threaded all through it with a fine, dark, branching lines, roots, veins, black and shining. And it wasn't a fish, and it wasn't a whale, and it didn't have a shape I could give a name to. It was just big, big past the reach of the deck lights. Big enough that what I was seeing wasn't the thing but a piece of the thing, the way you can't see a whole mountain when you're standing on it. And up out of the pale, near the surface, close enough that the deck lights caught them, there were eyes, not two, not a face. Just eyes, gold and flat and too big, scattered through the pale like coins thrown down a well, dozens of them, hundreds, all of them open, all of them looking up at the little steel boat with its little lights, and some of them, I swear this on my daughter, some of them were the flat gold eyes of black cod, and some of them were bigger and older than any fish, and one of them, low down, half swallowed in the pail, one of them was blue, and it was a boy's, and it was looking right at me. Then the wave came down on top of the trough, and the deck lights showed nothing but green water and white foam, and the thing was gone under, and the Marta Dawn climbed the next wall, and we ran. I don't know why it let us go. I've thought about it more than I've thought about anything else in my life, and I don't know. Maybe it had what it wanted. It had Cody. Maybe one is all it takes, all it comes up for. And once it had him, it didn't care about the boat and the rest of us any more than you care about the can once you've eaten what was in it. Maybe Rask was right the whole time, and the trick really is to give it nothing and keep your head down. And the storm was just a storm. And the pale thing in the trough was just passing under us on its way somewhere, and I happened to look out the window at the wrong second. Maybe it lost interest, the way Sten said it lost interest in the Erland. That's the version I try to keep, because it's the only one where the ocean is just the ocean and not something that chooses. But I saw the blue eye, and it saw me. And I don't have a version where that's nothing. We made Kodiak 2 days later. The storm blew itself out and the sea laid down and the sun even came out the last morning, thin and cold and yellow. And we came in past the buoys with the black cod on ice in the hold and Cody on ice with them. And there were men on the dock and a truck from the state trooper's office, because Rask had called it in on the way, a death aboard, and there's paperwork for that. There's a whole machine that grinds into motion when a man dies on a boat. I told them he went in his sleep, fever, a sickness he brought aboard that came on fast. It wasn't a lie I had to work at, because the dark under his skin looked like a sickness to a man who wanted it to, and the trooper wanted it to, and the coroner in Anchorage wanted it to, and Boots, whose arm they saved but who lost 2 fingers to the black that had gotten into them. Boots wanted it to more than anybody, and he backed my story without me asking. Nobody wants the other version. Nobody has a place to put it. You key the mic on channel 16, and you try to say it, and there aren't words that don't make you sound like a man who cracked up out there. And maybe that's what we are, all of us who've seen it. Maybe that's the honest name for it, cracked up. Sten would say it isn't. Sten would say the water is just deeper than people let themselves know, and there are things in the deep of it the same as there are things in the deep of anything, and that the only madness is a man in a steel box telling himself the half-mile of black water under his feet is empty because he needs it to be. Sten quit fishing after that trip. 40 seasons and he hung it up and moved inland, Montana, someplace as far from salt water as a man can get in this country, and he sends me a card at Christmas, and the card never says anything about it. It just says he's well, and the winters are cold and dry, and he sleeps fine. And I know what he means by that last part, that he sleeps fine, because he's making a point of it, because he knows I don't. I got my money. That's a thing I have to say, because it's true and because it's ugly and because leaving it out would be a lie of the kind I've told enough of. The season paid. I flew home to Oregon with a check that squared me with the state and left a little over, and I paid the child support, and Michaela's got no idea, she'll never have any idea, that the money that kept the trooper from garnishing her father's wages came up out of that water alongside the thing that took the kid. I flew her out that summer, like I'd promised. We went to the coast one day, the Oregon coast, and she wanted to go down to the water and put her feet in, the way kids do, and I let her. I made myself let her. And I stood on the wet sand in the cold Pacific wash with my 9-year-old daughter's hand in mine, and I looked out at the water going gray and flat to the horizon, and I thought about how it's all one water, all of it connected, the puddle around her ankles and the 600 fathoms off Kodiak and the miles-deep trenches past the Aleutians, one body of water wrapped around the whole world, and everything in it able to get everywhere else in it if it wants to. And I picked her up off the sand before she wanted me to, and she was mad about it the rest of the day, and I let her be mad. I don't sleep well. I told you Sten sleeps fine and makes a point of saying so. I don't, and I don't make a point of anything. I lie awake, most nights, and the worst nights are the ones with wind, because wind on the house sounds enough like wind on the water, and when I finally go under, I go under the way I did that season. All the way down, too fast, and there's no floor to it, and sometimes down at the bottom of the sleep there's a humming, a tune that isn't a tune. Too many notes, too close together, and long slides between them, and I know whose voice it is, and I know he's telling me the same thing he told me with my hand around his cold hand, that it's warm down there, that everybody thinks it's cold, but it's warm, that there's so much room. Last week I got a card, not from Sten, no name on it, no return address, mailed from a town on the Alaska coast I've never been to. Inside there was no letter. There was just a photograph, a girl on a porch squinting into the sun with a dog beside her, sodden once and dried stiff, the emulsion cracked all over from the salt. And I have looked at that photograph every night since, and I cannot tell any more, in the cracked and clouded part where her eyes should be. whether she is squinting at the sun the way she was in the picture Cody taped in his bunk, or whether she is looking up. Story 2. The tide at the lighthouse where I work keeps leaving things that shouldn't be there. The generator kicked on at 4 in the morning like it always did, and I lay there in the dark listening to it hum through the wall and telling myself that was the only reason I was awake. The station ran on shore power most days, but Gorse Head sat out far enough that the county kept a diesel unit in the shed for when the line went down, and it cycled itself on a test every morning whether the power was out or not. 4 a.m., a low rattle, then the hum, then the little click of the transfer switch. I'd heard it so many nights it had stopped meaning anything. Except that morning I lay there after it went quiet again, and I kept listening, and I didn't know what for. The bedroom faced the water. I'd taken the small room on purpose and given Nell the big one, because she was 6, and she needed the space for all the plastic horses and the coloring books and the pile of stuffed animals she slept under like a bear in a den, and because I didn't need much: a bed, a dresser with a lamp, a window that looked out past the rocks to where the light swept around every few seconds, red and then dark, red and then dark. Gorse Head Light was automated, had been since before I got the job. My work was the keeping, the paint, the brass, the seals on the lantern room, the drains, the propane, the 10,000 small things 100-and-some-year-old tower does when it's trying to slide back into the sea. I kept it from sliding. That was the whole of it. I got up because I wasn't going to sleep. I could feel it. Some mornings, you know. The floor was cold. The whole station was cold in a way that got into the boards and stayed there. Salt cold. The kind that doesn't warm up when you turn the heat on. It just sits under the warm air like a second floor under the first. I pulled on the jeans I'd left on the chair and a flannel that used to be my father's, and I went down the hall past Nell's door. It was open a few inches. I looked in the way I always did. She was under the animals with just her hair showing, dark like her mother's, and her breathing was slow and even. And I stood there a second longer than I needed to, the way you do when it's the only thing in your life that's going right. Then I went down to make coffee, and that's when I saw the light doing the thing. The kitchen window at the back of the station gave onto the yard and the path down to the rocks, and past that the water, and the beam from the tower came around over all of it every few seconds, red. That was normal. Gorse Head showed red because of the reef, a fixed characteristic, red flash every 7.5 seconds. I'd read the whole plate on it a dozen times. Red, dark, red, dark. You could set your pulse to it. That morning it went red, and then it went red again before it should have. 2 flashes close together, like a stutter, and then the long dark, and then the regular one came back. I stood at the sink with the empty pot in my hand, and I waited for it to do it again. It didn't. Red every 7.5 seconds, clean, all the way through a whole cup of coffee. I stood there and drank without tasting. You imagined it. Probably I did. A man half asleep watches a light long enough, he'll see it hiccup. The eye does that. I knew that. I wrote it in the log anyway, because that was the job. There was a green county logbook on the counter, and I put the date and the time, 4:40 a.m., and I wrote times light appeared to double flash once, single occurrence, no repeat observed. We'll monitor. Then I felt stupid and almost scratched it out. I left it. Gus at the harbor office read those logs maybe twice a year, and he'd give me hell for it. Ask me if I'd been into the cooking sherry. But you write what you see. My father kept logs his whole life on the boats, and he told me the log doesn't care if you feel stupid. The log is for the next guy. I should tell you about the money, because the money is why I was there and why I stayed there when a smarter man might have packed the truck. The caretaker position paid almost nothing. The Coast Guard didn't want it anymore. The county took it on as some kind of historical thing. And what they could offer was the station to live in rent-free, and a stipend that came every 2 weeks, and didn't cover much past the propane and the food. Karen and I had taken it when Nell was a baby, because it was a house, an actual house we didn't pay rent on. And we were both so tired of paying rent to men who never fixed the heat that a lighthouse on a rock felt like winning something that was almost 4 years back. 19 months ago, the county cut the stipend by a third when the levy failed, and I picked up hours doing maintenance for the harbor, and it was enough. Barely. It was the kind of enough where the truck payment and the propane fill-up couldn't land in the same week or something had to give, and usually the thing that gave was me eating. The truck was a '94 Ford Ranger, gray, going to rust at the wheel wells, 210,000 miles on it. I love that truck the way you love a dog that's getting old. I knew every sound it made. I owed $1,100 on it to a man named Coutreau who ran the lot up in town and who did not care that my wife had drowned. That's not a knock on him. Why would he care? He had his own troubles. That's the part of it people don't understand about a place like Gorse Head. It's beautiful, and everybody who drives out to the pullout to take a picture of the light thinks whoever lives there is living in a postcard. But a postcard doesn't have a propane bill. A postcard doesn't have a 6-year-old who needs shoes because her feet grew again and school starts in 3 weeks. I love the place. I also lay awake doing arithmetic that never came out right. Karen went into the water 2 years ago that October. I'll tell it plain because there's no soft way, and I've stopped looking for one. She swam. She'd grown up on this coast and she swam in it her whole life, in water that would stop most men's hearts, and she was strong, stronger than me in the water by a long way. She went out one evening off the South Rocks the way she did maybe once a week when the weather let her, and she didn't come back in. They found the towel folded on the flat rock where she always left it. They found one of her sandals a week later, 3 miles up the beach at Dagger Cove. They never found her. The Coast Guard called it a drowning, probable, cause undetermined, and Gus Pelletier, who ran the harbor, stood in my kitchen with his hat in his hands and couldn't look at me, and that was that. No box to bury, no stone that meant anything, just the water, still out there, still doing what it does, red flash every 7.5 seconds going over the top of it all night long. Nell was 4 when it happened. She's 6 now. She remembers her mother the way you remember a house you lived in when you were small, in pieces, in smells, in a particular blanket. She doesn't cry about it much anymore, which I'm told is normal and which breaks something in me every time I notice it. I do the crying for both of us, and I do it where she can't see. So that's the man I was, standing at the sink that morning watching a light stutter, a widower with a rust truck and a propane bill and a girl asleep under a pile of horses. I want you to have him clear, because everything that came after only matters if you've got him clear. The sun came up gray. It came up gray most days out there in the shoulder of the year, the fog sitting offshore like it was waiting on something, the water the color of a nickel. I made Nell oatmeal with the brown sugar she liked and too much of it, and she came down in her pajamas with a horse in each hand and told me a long story about a dream that didn't have an ending. And I said, in the right places, and drank my second cup and felt almost all right. A kid does that to you. They pull you up out of the arithmetic. You can't sit at the bottom of the well doing sums when there's a 6-year-old telling you a horse named Buttons went to the moon. "Are we going to town?" she said, after I checked the drains. "You want to come up the tower with me first?" She did. She always did. The lantern room was her favorite place in the world. All that glass, the wind coming off the sea, and if the fog was in you couldn't see the bottom, and it felt like standing in a cloud. I clipped her into the little harness I'd made her out of climbing webbing, because the gallery outside the glass had a rail from a century ago and I didn't trust it with my own weight, let alone hers. And we went up the spiral stairs, counting them the way we always did. 61 steps. She counted every one out loud in her serious voice, and I said the numbers with her under my breath. Up top, the fog was in close, but not all the way, and you could see the rocks below. The black reef the light was there to warn men off of, wet and shining and streaming as the swell ran over it and pulled back. Karen used to call the reef the Teeth. Everybody in town called it that. You'd hear the old men at the diner say a boat went up on the Teeth in some year before I was born, and they'd all go quiet. I did my check. Seal's good. Brass needed doing, but it always needed doing. The lamp itself was a sealed unit, nothing for me to touch. The actual light was the one thing at Gorse Head I wasn't responsible for, and the one thing that never gave me trouble. I noted the level in the propane for the standby beacon, the old backup that ran on gas if the electric failed and the diesel failed both. A light behind a light behind a light. That's how they built these things. They built them to not go dark. Nell was at the glass looking down at the water with her hands cupped around her eyes. "There's the lady," she said. I didn't turn around right away. I was writing the propane level. "What ladybug?" "Down on the rocks. She's looking up at us." I looked. The reef was empty. It was always empty. Nobody went out on the teeth. You'd die out there. The swell would take you off in a second, and there was no way down anyway except to fall. Gray rock, white water, a couple of gulls standing on the high part with their feathers roughed up against the wind. "I don't see anybody, Bug." She went behind the rock. Nell said it easy, the way kids say things, already bored of it. Already turning to press her forehead on the glass and fog it up with her breath and draw a horse in the fog with her finger. Not scared, not anything. Just a thing she'd seen, like everything else she saw and reported and let go of. I looked at the reef a while longer than I let on. Then I told her to quit fogging the glass I'd just cleaned, and we went down counting backward from 61, and I didn't think about it again until the next thing happened. That's how it goes. I figured out since. Not all at once. One small wrong thing, and you set it down, and you pick up the next ordinary thing, and it's only later, laying the small wrong things out in a row, that you see they were pointing somewhere the whole time. Town was 8 miles up the coast road, a place called Hesper. If you've never been to that part of the coast, I'll tell you it isn't the pretty kind. The pretty towns are further south where the money is, the ones with the taffy shops and the kite stores. Hesper was a working town gone half to sleep since the cannery closed, one main street called Front Street that ran along the harbor, a school, a chevron, a grocery called Thrifty's that a family named Osgood had run for 3 generations, and Millie's, which was the diner, and which was where I was headed because I did a little maintenance for Millie on the side and she paid me in cash and pie. I parked the Ranger in front of the diner and it dieseled a second after I cut the key, coughing, the way it did when it was cold, and Nell was already out and running for the door because Deb worked the counter, and Deb kept a jar of the little pinwheel mints just for her. Millie herself had been dead 6 years. The diner kept her name the way these things do. Deb Frawley ran it now, a wide woman in her 60s with a voice like a foghorn and a soft spot the size of the harbor for my kid. She scooped Nell up over the counter and set her on a stool and gave her the mints and a coloring placemat and a cup of the weak hot cocoa she made special, and I got a booth by the window and Deb brought me coffee without asking. "You look like hell, Ray," she said. "Thank you, Deb." "You sleeping?" "Some." She gave me the look she gave me, the one that had grief in it, because Deb had lost a husband to the water years back too. A lot of them had in Hesper. That's what the water does in a town like that. It takes the men off the boats, and every so often it takes somebody off the rocks, and everybody just carries it. She didn't say anything else about it. She put a slice of Marionberry in front of me that I hadn't ordered, and she went to yell at the cook about something. Gus Pelletier came in around 10. Gus was the harbor master, had been for 30 years, a short barrel of a man with a white beard and hands like a couple of gloves left out in the rain. And he was my boss for the harbor hours and the closest thing I had to a friend since Karen. He sat down across from me without being asked and took my fork and had a bite of my pie. "Your light was doing something last night," he said. I put my coffee down. "What do you mean doing something?" "Bill Teague was coming in late off the tuna and he called it in on the radio. Said your light doubled up on him, flashed twice quick around 4 in the morning." Threw his count off. Gus took another bite of my pie. I told him he was drunk. Was he drunk? "I saw it too," I said. My mouth had gone a little dry. 4:40. I logged it. Once. Just the once. Then it went back regular. Gus stopped chewing. He looked at me a second. Gus was not a man who spooked. He'd pulled more bodies out of that harbor than the fire department, and he had a face that had gone flat and calm about all of it a long time ago, the way faces do when they've seen the thing they were afraid of and lived past it. but he looked at me a second there like he was deciding something. "The lamp's a sealed unit," he said. "There's no way for it to double. It's not a rotating optic anymore. It's a fixed characteristic. It's on a timer chip. It flashes on the timer or it doesn't flash. It can't stutter. There's no mechanism. I know that. So one man seeing it, that's a man who's tired. Two men seeing it." He didn't finish. He took the last bite of my pie, the point of it, which is the part I'd been saving, and he stood up and put his hat on. "I'll have Pruitt come look at the timer. Don't touch it yourself. County'll have a fit if you're in the lamp housing. I know the rules, Gus." "I know you do." He put $2 on the table for pie he hadn't ordered and eaten most of mine instead, which was the most Gus Pelletier thing in the world, and he stopped by the counter and let Nell show him her coloring, and he told her it was the best horse he ever saw, and then he went out into the gray, and I watched him cross Front Street to the harbor office with his head down against a wind that wasn't blowing that hard. I want to say I felt a chill or a warning or something. I didn't. I felt tired, and I felt the small, good feeling of being in a warm booth with my kids safe on a stool 20 feet away and pie in front of me even if Gus had eaten the best of it, that's all. If there's a lesson in any of this, and I don't think there is, it's that the bad thing doesn't announce itself. It comes in under the ordinary days. It comes in the way the fog comes in, and you don't see it move. You just look up at some point, and the whole world's gone white and close, and you can't find the road. We did the errands, thrifties for groceries, where old man Osgood carried Nell's bag out for her like she was the Queen of England. The Chevron, where I put 20 in the truck and did the arithmetic and didn't like it. Nell got new shoes from the bin at the church thrift, white sneakers a size too big so she'd grow into them, and she wore them out of the store and wouldn't take them off, and I told her they looked like they could run to the moon and back, and she believed me because she was 6. On the way home, the fog came in off the water and swallowed the coast road so that I drove the last 2 miles at 15 miles an hour with my hand tight on the wheel, the yellow line the only thing in the world. And somewhere off to the right where the cliff was and the drop was, I could hear the foghorn on Gorse Head start up. That's the second thing. I have to tell it right. Gorse Head has an automated fog signal, a horn that reads the moisture in the air off a sensor and sounds itself when it gets thick. 2 blasts every 30 seconds. A low, flat note you feel in your chest more than here. I'd lived under that horn for years. In the fog it ran all night and you slept through it the way you sleep through your own heartbeat. That evening, driving the last 2 miles blind, I heard it start, and I counted it the way you count things when you can't see and your ears are all you've got. 2 blasts, 30 seconds. 2 blasts, 30 seconds. And then, in the space between, down in the dark where there shouldn't have been anything, I heard it answer. Not an echo. I know an echo. The cliffs threw the horn back sometimes, and I knew the sound of that. It came a half-second behind and thinner. This was different. This came in the gap, in the full silence between the horn's 2-blast pattern, and it was lower than the horn, and longer. One long, low note that started after the horn stopped and ran down under the bottom of what I could hear and kept going a while after I'd have expected it to quit. I told myself it was a ship, a big one, out past the fog, running its own signal. That happens. That's a thing that happens. I did not believe it was a ship. I don't know how to explain the difference to you except that a sound coming off the water at you in the fog either belongs to the world or it doesn't, and your body knows which before your head can catch up. And every hair on my arms was standing up under my father's flannel, and my foot had come off the gas without me telling it to. In the back, in her car seat, Nell said, "That's the lady singing." I looked in the mirror. She was looking out the window into the fog, calm, her new shoes swinging, not scared, not anything, the same as up in the lantern room. And I said, keeping my voice level, because that's the one thing you can always give a kid, a level voice. "What lady? Bug." "The one from the rocks," she said. "She sings when it's foggy. She wants to come up to the house." I didn't say anything to that. What do you say? I drove us home through the white at 15 miles an hour, and I got us in the door, and I made grilled cheese and tomato soup, and I let her watch a show on the old tablet with the cracked corner. And the whole time the horn ran outside. 2 blasts, 30 seconds, and I stood at the sink not eating and listening for the other thing in the gaps. It came twice more that I was sure of. Then the fog thinned around 9 and the horn shut itself off and the night went quiet, regular quiet, the swell on the rocks and the wind in the gorse and nothing else. And I put Nell to bed under her horses, and I sat up a long time with the county log open and a beer I didn't drink, and I did not write down what my daughter said in the truck. I wrote times, fog signal, operating normally, possible vessel traffic offshore. That's a lie, and I knew it was a lie when I wrote it. The log is for the next guy. I didn't want the next guy to think I'd lost it. Pruitt came out 2 days later to look at the timer. Dale Pruitt did the electrical for the county, a young guy, 30 maybe, with a service truck and a tablet and none of the old superstition the harbor men had, which I liked about him. He climbed up into the lamp housing with a headlamp on and a meter, and he was up there the better part of an hour while I stood at the bottom of the tower with Nell, who wanted to go up and couldn't, and who was mad about it. He came down, shaking his head. "There's nothing wrong with it," he said. "Timer's clean. Chip's reading right. Voltage is right. The flash interval is dead on 7.5. I sat up there and watched it cycle 40 times, 40 for 40, no double, no drop. Whatever you saw, it's not the unit." He was packing his meter back in its foam. "You want my honest opinion? A flash that quick, twice, the eye can invent that. Persistence of vision. You get an afterimage. Your brain reads it as a second flash, especially half asleep. Bill Teague saw it off the water." "Bill Teague," Pruitt said, and left it there, because everybody in Hesper had an opinion on how much Bill Teague drank, and it was a fair point, and it was also not the point. But I let it go, because what was I going to say? I was going to say my dead wife is singing in the fog and my kid can see her on the teeth. I was not going to say that to Dale Pruitt with his foam-lined meter case and his service truck. He stopped at the door of the truck. "Hey, weird thing though." He said it the way you say a thing you'd forgotten to mention. "Light, up in the lamp housing. On the inside of the glass, there's marks." "What kind of marks?" "Like salt, like dried salt spray. On the inside, little runs of it, like water dried on the glass." He shrugged. "Which is nothing. Except the housing's sealed, right?" "You told me yourself it's sealed. I couldn't figure how salt water gets on the inside of a sealed housing 60 feet up." He got in the truck. "Probably a bad gasket somewhere. I'd have the county look at the seals before winter." And he drove off up the coast road. And I stood there with my kid's hand in mine, looking up at the top of a tower where the inside of the glass had salt on it, and for the first time I felt the thing I'm going to call fear, because that's what it was, even though it was small yet, a cold thread of it going up my back. The inside of the glass, 60 feet up, sealed. I didn't go up and look. I want to be honest about that too, all through this, the times I didn't look. There were a lot of them. A man will not look at a thing for a long time when looking might cost him more than he can pay. I had a kid to feed and a truck payment, and I could not afford to be a man who saw things, so I got very good at not looking, and I have thought a great deal since about what that cost me, and about whether the not looking is the reason things went the way they went. The tide started leaving things about a week after that. I walked the rocks most mornings. It was part of the job, sort of, checking the base of the tower and the seawall and the little boat landing that nobody used anymore. And it was part of me, too. It was the walk Karen and I used to take, and it was where I went to have the feelings I didn't have in front of Nell. Low tide pulled back off the flat rocks below the south side and left the pools and the weed and whatever the sea felt like giving up, which was usually nothing, crab shells and bull kelp and a fishing float now and then. Once a whole crab pot with the line still on it, which I hauled up and gave to Gus. The first thing was a shoe. A kid's shoe, a small white sneaker, sitting on the flat rock above the tide line where the water couldn't have set it, above the rack, up where you'd have to carry it. I stood over it a while. It was Nell's size or close. It was so much like the one she'd worn out of the thrift store that my heart did a bad thing in my chest before my head caught up and told me Nell's were on Nell's feet, in the house. I tied them that morning. This was a different shoe, older, the white gone gray, the laces stiff with salt, one of them frayed to nothing. A kid's shoe that had been in the water a long time and then had been set on a dry rock above the line, toe pointing at the tower. I picked it up. I don't know why. You'd think a man would leave it. Inside it was packed with wet sand and a small green crab that scuttled out over my thumb and dropped to the rock and was gone, and I made a sound I'm not proud of and dropped the shoe, and it landed toe pointing at the tower again, and I told myself that was chance. A shoe lands how it lands, and I left it there, and I did not walk the rocks the rest of that week. But of course I went back. You always go back, and there were more things. Not all at once. That's what I keep having to say. Because if I lay them out in a paragraph, it sounds like a haunted house in a movie. And it wasn't like that. It was slow. It was days apart. It was one wrong thing sitting in a week of ordinary things, so that each time I could tell myself the sea gives up junk. That's all the sea does. It's a big cold dump that hands you back whatever men lose in it eventually. A doll's arm, the pink gone chalk white, the little fingers spread. A hairbrush, a woman's, wood-backed, the bristles full of dark hair. I stood over that one for a long time in a wind that had gone right through me. Karen had a wood-backed brush. I'd bought it for her at a stall in Astoria the first year we were together. I'd carried it in my own pocket half a day before I gave it to her because I wanted to give it to her at the right time, on the beach, and I did. And she'd laughed at me for being sappy and then kept it the rest of her life. It was in her things still, in a box in the closet I couldn't open. It had to be. This was a different brush. There are 1,000 wood-backed brushes. I did not pick this one up. I looked at the dark hair caught in it, and I turned around and I walked back up to the house and I checked the closet, and the box was there, taped shut the way I'd taped it, and I did not open it to check, because if I opened it and the brush was gone, I don't know what I'd have done. And if I opened it and the brush was there, that was almost worse, because then the one on the rocks was a message and not a coincidence, and I wasn't ready to know it was a message. A child's rain boot, yellow, one. A page of a book, sodden, the print run to gray, unreadable, and then the thing that broke the part of me that was still calling it junk, which was a photograph. It was on the flat rock, a photograph, face up, the way you'd set a thing down for someone to find. The water does not set a photograph face up on a dry rock above the line. It was old, the colors gone the way they go, orange and faded, curled at the corners with the salt, and it showed a woman standing on rocks, these rocks, the teeth. You could see the base of the tower behind her, our tower, Gorse Head, unmistakable. She was standing on the reef in a dark coat with her back mostly to the camera, looking out to sea, one hand up, shading her eyes or waving. I couldn't tell. I did not know her. I need you to understand that, because you're going to think it was Karen, and it wasn't Karen. It was a woman I had never seen in a coat I had never seen from a time by the look of the photo before I was born. A stranger, standing on rocks no living person could stand on and survive, in front of my tower, and someone had set her picture on the rock for me to find, face up, dry, above the line. I took that one inside. I put it in the kitchen drawer with the rubber bands and the fuses and the dead batteries, and I shut the drawer, and I stood in my kitchen with my hands flat on the counter, and I made myself breathe. Nell was upstairs. I could hear her up there talking to her horses, doing all their voices, and that sound, that ordinary sound of my kid alive and playing, was the rope I held on to. She wants to come up to the house. I took the photograph back out that night after Nell was asleep, and I looked at it under the kitchen light for a long time, and the longer I looked, the less sure I was of what I was seeing. The way a word goes strange if you say it enough. The woman's hand, up by her face, waving, I'd thought, or shading her eyes. But the more I looked, the more it looked like she was doing neither, like her arm was up because she was reaching, reaching up and back toward the tower, toward the top of it, toward the light. And her fingers were spread the way the doll's fingers had been spread, the way a hand is when it wants a thing it can't reach. I put it back in the drawer. I got out my father's old chart of the coast, the paper one, because I wanted to do something with my hands that was real, and I found Gorse Head on it, and I found the teeth, and just south of the reef. In my father's small handwriting from 30 years back, in pencil, there was a note I'd looked at 100 times and never once read, the way you don't read the familiar. It said times keep off, lost the advance here, and a year, 1891. And I sat there with the chart and thought, a boat went up on the teeth. That's the story the old men go quiet about at the diner, the one from before any of them were born, the advance. 1891. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the kitchen with the light on and the chart open and the drawer shut on the photograph, and around 4 in the morning the generator kicked on for its test, the rattle and the hum and the click. And I about came out of my skin, and then it went quiet, and in the quiet after it I heard, faint, out over the water, a long, low note run down under the bottom of my hearing and keep going after it should have stopped. There was no fog that night. The horn wasn't running. There was nothing out there to make that sound. I went up the stairs and I looked in on Nell. She was awake. She was sitting up in her bed in the dark with the horses all around her, not scared, looking at the window. And when I came in, she looked at me and she said, "She's on the rocks. She's singing to the light." She does it so the light will let her come up, and then she lay back down and pulled the horses over her and went to sleep like she'd said nothing at all, and I stood in her doorway until the sky went gray. I need to tell you about Vern, because Vern is the one who told me what I was dealing with, or what he thought I was dealing with, and I've gone back and forth 100 times on whether he was a crazy old man or the only one who wasn't. Vern Kessler had the last house before the road turned out to the point, a little gray salt box with a yard full of net floats and a wind chime he'd made out of old spark plugs. He was past 80. He'd been a fisherman his whole life, and his father before him and back as far as anybody could count, and he was the oldest thing in Hesper by a decade, older than Gus, older than the diner. One of those men who've gone so far into old age they come out the far side of it into a kind of clear, cold place where they'll say anything because they've got nothing left to protect. I did his gutters and his woodpile a couple times a year and wouldn't take money for it, and he gave me smoked salmon and told me stories, and mostly I half listened the way you do with the old. I drove down to Vern's the day after the photograph. I didn't plan to tell him anything. I told myself I was checking his woodpile before the weather, but I sat in his kitchen with a cup of coffee so strong it about stood up on its own, and he looked at me across the table with those pale eyes gone almost colorless with age, and he said, "Something's wrong out at the head, not a question." I didn't answer right away. "Your girl seeing her yet?" he said. I set the cup down. My hand wasn't steady and I didn't try to make it. "Seeing who?" "Vern. The one off the advance." He said it flat, like he was telling me the tide table. "You'd have found the note on your daddy's chart." He knew. Everybody that keeps that light long enough figures it out, and then they don't keep it long. You know why the Coast Guard automated Gorse Head first out of all of them on this coast? Before the tech was even good? Because they couldn't keep a keeper out there, couldn't keep a family. They'd send a man with a wife and kids, and inside 2 years the man be asking off. And if you got the paper on why, and I have, it's always the same. It's always the youngest child. The youngest one sees her first. Fog came up outside the window. It was doing that more and more, coming up in the afternoons, sitting on the point. The advance was a coaster, Vern said. Went up on the teeth in a fog in the fall of 1891, before there was a light out there, which is the whole reason they built the light, on account of the advance and 2 others before her. Went up on the reef at night and broke apart, and the sea had all of them by morning but one. There was a woman aboard. Emmeline something. The records are bad. A young woman going up the coast to be married, and she made the rocks. You understand what I'm saying. She got up out of the water and onto the teeth in the dark and the cold, alone, everyone else gone, and there was no light and no house and no soul to see her. And she stood on that reef and she waved and she called and she watched the shore where nobody came, and she was 3-4 days dying out there before the cold took her, they figure, because when they finally got out to the reef in a calm, she was up on the high rock, sat up, facing the shore, waiting on a light that wasn't built yet. I thought about the photograph, the hand up, reaching. They built the light 2 years later, Vern said, right where she died. And every keeper's youngest child from that day to the day they automated it saw a lady on the rocks who sang in the fog and wanted to come up to the house and wanted the light to let her in. And the ones that stayed too long, he stopped. He turned his colorless eyes on me, and for the first time in all the years I'd known him, he looked like he was afraid of something, and an old man afraid is a bad thing to see. You get your girl off that rock, Ray. I don't care how you do it or where you go or how you pay for it. She's not after you. She never wants the keeper. She's cold and she's been alone in the dark 130 years, and she wants a child to keep her company, and yours is the only one on that whole coast sleeps within sound of the horn. Get her off. Tonight if you can. I want to tell you I laughed at him. That's what the man I'd been a month before would have done. Made a joke, thanked him for the coffee, gone home. But I'd found a shoe above the tide line pointed at the tower, and a brush full of dark hair, and a photograph set face up on a dry rock, and I'd heard a thing answer the horn in the fog. And my kid was telling me the same story this 80-year-old man was telling me, word for near word. She wants to come up to the house. She sings so the light will let her in, and my kid had never met Vern Kessler in her life. So I didn't laugh. I said, "Where would I even go, Vern? I've got $1,100 of truck and a stipend and no people left. This is the house. There's no other house." And Vern Kessler reached across the table and put one of his cold, hard, old hands over mine, which he had never done, and he said, "Then you keep every light in that house burning, and you do not let her go near the water after dark, and you pray for a clear sky. She can't come up out of the fog if there's no fog. And you find somewhere to be. I mean it. A tent in the hills is a mansion next to that house on a foggy night." I drove home. The fog was in by the time I got there, thick, and the horn had started, 2 blasts, 30 seconds, and in the gaps, faint, under it, the long, low note was running, and it was closer than it had been. I want to be exact about that because it's the thing I noticed that scared me worse that day. It was closer, not out past the reef anymore. In, toward the rocks, toward the base of the tower, toward the path that came up from the water to the house. Nell was at Deb's. I'd started leaving her at the diner on my errand runs, and Deb was glad to have her, and I told myself it was so I could work faster, and the truth was I didn't want her at the house near the water anymore. Not since the boot, not since the photograph. I drove back to town through the fog to get her, and we ate dinner in the booth by the window, the 2 of us. Grilled cheese for her and a burger for me I couldn't finish. And Deb watched me not finish it and didn't say anything, and I made a decision in that booth that I'd been circling for days. We weren't going to sleep at the house that night. I didn't have the money for a motel, and I knew it, but there was a place up the highway toward the county road, the Spruce Tip, an old motor court where the rooms went for $40 a night in the off-season. And $40 was the propane. $40 was a week of groceries, and I decided I did not care. I had a little cash from Millie's, folded in the visor. Vern's voice was in my ear. A tent in the hills is a mansion. I'd sleep my kid in a $40 room off the highway with every light on and worry about the propane when the propane came due. I told Deb we might take a little trip. She looked at me a second, and then she went in the back and came out with a paper bag of day-old muffins and 2 of the little cartons of milk, and she pressed them on me and wouldn't hear otherwise, and she crouched down to Nell's level and told her to be a good girl for her daddy, and Nell hugged her around the neck, and I have thanked God more than once since for Deb Frawley, who never knew what she was sending us off into and who did the only thing she knew to do, which was feed us. We needed clothes and Nell's medicine. She had an inhaler for when the cold air got in her chest, and that meant going back to the house first. It was full dark by then and the fog was down thick, and I told myself in and out, 5 minutes, grab the bags I'd already half packed and the inhaler and the horses she couldn't sleep without, and back in the truck and up the highway to the spruce tip where the fog didn't reach because it sat inland of the coast, up in the spruce, where the air was dry. The coast road out to the point was a tunnel of white. I drove it at 10 miles an hour with Nell in the back and the muffins on the seat, and the horn getting louder as we came out toward the head. 2 blasts, 30 seconds, and the low note running under it close now. Close. And the closer we got to the house, the more I could feel it was a mistake. The way you feel a mistake in your gut before your head will say it. But the inhaler. You don't leave without the inhaler. A parent does the arithmetic even in a nightmare. Especially in a nightmare. The house came up out of the fog and I got us inside and I turned on every light on the ground floor and I told Nell to sit at the kitchen table and eat a muffin and not move. And I went up the stairs 2 at a time to get the bags and the inhaler and the horses. And I was up there stuffing horses into a pillowcase, my heart going, thinking almost we're almost out, when the fog signal stopped. It just stopped, mid-pattern, 1 blast, and then no second blast, and then nothing. I stood in Nell's room in the sudden silence, with a pillowcase of horses in my hand. The horn does not stop when there's fog. It reads the moisture, and it runs until the moisture drops, and the fog was thick as I'd ever seen it. I could see it pressing on the black window, so the horn should have been running, and it had stopped. And in the place where its sound had been there was the other sound, the long low note, and it was not out on the water anymore. It was under the house. I don't know how else to say it. It came up through the floor, through the rock the house was built on, a note so low it was more in my teeth and the soles of my feet than in my ears, and it filled the whole house from the bottom, and every light I turned on flickered, dimmed down to almost nothing the way lights do when something big pulls current, and came back up. "Nell," I said. I wasn't loud. I couldn't get loud. "Nell, come to the stairs, bug." She didn't answer. I came down those stairs faster than I've done anything in my life, and the kitchen was empty. The chair was pushed back. The muffin was on the table with 1 bite out of it. The back door, the door that gave onto the yard and the path down to the rocks, the door I know I had locked. I had locked it. I lock it every night of my life. That door was standing open, and the fog was coming in through it in a slow, low roll across the floor, and it was cold, colder than the night, cold like the inside of the freezer chest in the shed. And out in the white past the door I could hear my daughter's voice, small and happy and far away, talking to someone, the way she talked to Deb, the way she talked to her horses, easy and glad, going down the path toward the water. I went out that door without shoes. I want that in here. I went out into the fog in my socks with a pillowcase of plastic horses still in my hand because I never put it down, and I have thought since that if I'd taken 1 second to grab the big lantern off the hook by the door I might have, but I didn't. I went out blind into the white after the sound of my kid, and the fog was so thick I couldn't see the tower lit up 60 feet over my head. I could only see the red of it come and go somewhere up in the white, red, dark, red, dark. And I followed her voice down the path I knew in the dark, down toward the rocks, toward the water, calling her name. "Nell, Nell, stop, stop where you are, baby, don't go on the rocks." Her voice came back to me, and it wasn't scared. It was worse than scared. It was delighted. It was the voice she used on Christmas morning. "Daddy, it's the lady." "She's so cold, Daddy. She's been so cold. She wants me to come sit with her so she's not lonesome. She says it's just down here. She says it's just a little ways down." The rocks were slick under my socks. I could hear the water now, close, the swell running up into the reef and dragging back, that suck and boom. And I knew I was near the edge of where the flat rock dropped off to the teeth. The place where a wrong step in the dark was the end. The place Karen went off from. and I got down on my hands and knees in the fog and the cold, and I crawled toward my daughter's voice with the wet rock tearing my hands, and I screamed her name into the white. And for 1 second, the fog opened. It does that. I've seen it 100 times. A rip in the fog when the wind gusts. A window that shows you the water for a breath and closes again. It opened, and there was moon behind the fog somewhere because there was a gray light in that gap, and I saw the reef, the flat rock, and then the drop, and then the high rock of the teeth streaming with water, and I saw my daughter. She was at the edge. She was at the very edge of the flat rock where it dropped to the reef, standing there in her 2 big white sneakers with her arms out, reaching down over the edge, reaching down toward the water the way you'd reach to help someone up, and below her, coming up out of the black water onto the reef, up the streaming rock with the swell breaking white all around, there was a shape. I'm not going to describe it to you the way you want. I've had a long time to build it in my head into something I can put in a sentence, and I won't do it because the truth is I saw it for less than a second, and most of what I could tell you now I've added since. In the dark, the way the mind builds a face out of a coat on a chair, what I saw was this. A shape the color of the water coming up onto the rock with its arm raised, reaching up toward my daughter's reaching down hand. An arm too long and the fingers spread, and dark hair moving in the water around a head that was turned up toward her. And it was glad, too. I could feel that it was glad. The same delight that was in Nell's voice. 2 lonesome things reaching for each other across the last 2 feet of air, and it was singing. That low note. Up close, it was almost words. It was almost a name. The light came around, red, over the top of the fog, and in the red I saw the shape flinch. Just that. The light touched it and it flinched. It drew back down toward the water. The reaching arm pulled in. The light. She needs the light to let her in. She can't come up if the light won't have her. Vern's voice, or my own, I don't know, but I understood it, all at once, the way you understand a thing in a dream. She'd been working the light for weeks, the stutter, the salt on the inside of the sealed glass. She'd been trying to get into the light, to turn it, to make it hers, so it would stop being the thing that kept her off and start being the thing that called her in, and she wasn't there yet. She couldn't hold it, and the red still came around every 7.5 seconds, and every time it came around, it drove her back down toward the water for a breath. 7.5 seconds. That was all I had, the length of a breath. I went in the dark. I'll never fully understand what made me do it that way, because everything in me wanted to go when I could see, when the red came around and I could see my kid and see the edge. But the red was the thing holding it off. And if I went in the light and slipped and we both went over, then the light had done nothing but watch us die. So I waited. The red came around and I looked at exactly where she was, burned it into my eyes, her white shoes at the lip of the rock, her arms out over the drop, and then the light went dark, and in the dark, blind, I went. I hit her low, around the legs, the way my own father tackled me on the lawn a lifetime ago. And I felt her come off her feet, and I felt us go down onto the rock, and I felt the edge. I felt my own legs go out over nothing, out over the drop, my feet hanging in the cold, empty air over the reef, and I dug the toes of my socks into the rock, and I dragged us back, both of us, up onto the flat, and Nell was screaming now, finally, the delight gone out of her, screaming that I'd hurt her and that the lady was cold and I'd left her. We'd left her all alone. And under the screaming, under all of it, that low note came up off the water one more time, and it was not glad anymore. The red came around. I got my feet under me and I got her up over my shoulder, my arm locked over the backs of her knees, and I ran. I could not see the path. I ran anyway, uphill, toward where the house had to be, my socks tearing off my feet on the rock, and the fog was closing again behind us, and the cold was coming up behind us. I could feel it on my neck, that freezer cold, and the note ran up under me through the rock, trying to slow my feet, and Nell screamed and beat on my back with her small fists, and I ran, and the light came around and around, red, dark, and each red was a little farther behind us, and each dark I thought, this is the one, This is the dark she takes us in. And then the yellow of the kitchen door was in front of me in the white, and I went through it, and I turned, and I slammed it, and I threw the bolt, and I put my back against it, and I slid down it to the floor with my daughter in my lap in a house lit up like a church, every bulb burning, and I held her while she screamed, and then while she cried, and then while she went quiet, and outside the horn started up again, 2 blasts, 30 seconds. Ordinary, like nothing, like it had never stopped. We didn't go to the spruce tip. I couldn't have driven. We sat on the kitchen floor with our backs against the bolted door until the sky went gray and the fog burned off. And when the sun was up and the water was flat and blue and innocent out the window like it hadn't done a thing, I put Nell in the truck and I drove us to Gus Pelletier's house, and I stood on his porch and I could not talk. He took one look at me and my torn-up feet and my daughter asleep against the window, and he brought us in, and he didn't ask a single question, and I have loved that man ever since for the questions he didn't ask. We stayed with Gus a while. I quit the light. I called the county from Gus's kitchen and told them I was done, effective now. They could keep the last stipend, and the woman on the phone was annoyed with me for the paperwork, and I let her be annoyed. Gus knew a man with a rental in Hesper proper, up off Front Street, away from the water, a plain little house with a plain little yard, and the rent was more than nothing, which was more than I'd been paying, and I don't know yet how I'll cover it. I picked up more hours. I sold the chart, my father's chart, to a collector up in Astoria for more than I'd have guessed, and I did not tell him about the pencil note in the corner, and I did not keep the photograph. I drove out to the deep water off the point one calm afternoon, and I dropped the photograph over the side and watched it go down, turning, the woman in the dark coat with her arm up, reaching, down and down until the green took her, and I said I'm sorry out loud to nobody, because I am, she was cold and alone in the dark 130 years, and it was never her fault. But she was not having my girl. Some things you're sorry for and you do anyway. Nell is all right. That's the thing I hold. She had bad nights for a long time, and she has fewer now. She doesn't talk about the lady much anymore, the way she doesn't talk about her mother much anymore. The pieces sinking down into her where I can't reach them. And I've made my peace that some of what happened out there she'll carry the rest of her life in a place she won't be able to name, the way we all carry the worst nights of our childhood, as weather, as a feeling that comes up on the foggy days. We live inland of the water now. You can't see the light from the new house, but you can hear the horn on the thick nights, faint, 8 miles off, 2 blasts, 30 seconds, and I lie awake on those nights the way I used to, and I listen, and I tell myself I'm only listening to the horn. Last week the fog came in early, before dark, and I went to get Nell in from the yard, and she wasn't playing. She was standing at the back fence looking off west toward the water she can't see from here, still, with her head tipped a little, the way you stand when you're listening to something a long way off, and when I said her name, she didn't turn around right away. Then she did. She smiled, and she came in for supper, and she was my kid, all of her, nothing wrong in her face. And I made grilled cheese, and we ate at the table in the lit-up kitchen, and it was fine. It was an ordinary night. But before we went in, I stood a second where she'd stood, at the fence, facing the water I couldn't see, and I listened the way she'd been listening. And under the fog, way off, down where the head is, I heard the horn, 2 blasts, 30 seconds. And in the gap, in the long silence between, so faint I've told myself 100 times since that I made it up, a low note ran down under the bottom of my hearing and kept going after it should have stopped. She's patient. That's the thing about the cold. It waited 130 years on the reef for the light to be built. It can wait on a little girl who lives 8 miles inland and still, some nights, tips her head toward the water like she's being called. I keep every light in the house burning. I don't let her out after dark. And on the foggy nights, I sit up in the kitchen with the county's old green logbook that I never gave back, and I write down what I hear, because the log doesn't care if you feel stupid. And the log is for the next guy. There's always a next guy. Story 3, the sea never gave them back. The water at 190 feet is not black the way a closet is black. A closet has a door somewhere behind you, and light comes in around it, and your eyes make shapes out of nothing. Down there, your eyes make nothing out of nothing. The light off my helmet lamp went out maybe 4 feet, and then it just quit, and past that was a coal that had color to it. A deep green going gray, going to whatever comes after gray. I hung there in it with my boots not touching bottom yet, and I listened to myself breathe, and the breathing came back at me through the helmet the way it always does. Too loud, too close, a man in a small metal room made out of his own head. I want to tell you about the breathing first because that's the thing you never get used to. No matter how many hours you log, you'd think you would. I had close to 9,000 hours of bottom time by the fall I'm talking about, and I still heard it every dive like the first one. The regulator ticks when you pull air, the exhaust burbles up past your ears. Under all of it, there's your own heart doing its work, and when you get scared, and you will get scared, the heart is the loudest thing in the whole ocean. My name is Russ Kellett. I've been a working diver for going on 22 years, most of it in warm water off Louisiana and Texas, welding on rigs and clearing pipeline and doing the kind of jobs where the company hands you a check big enough that you don't ask too many questions about why the last guy quit. I came back north when my mother got sick, and I stayed north after she passed because by then I'd met a woman named Colleen and we had a girl, Amy, and you don't drag a kid all over the Gulf Coast chasing hitches. So I did inland work, bridge piers, intake screens at the paper mill, once in a while a body recovery for the county, which pays nothing and costs you sleep. That fall, the money had gotten thin. Colleen and I weren't together anymore, which is a longer story than this one and not one I'm going to tell. But the short version is, I owed back support, and I owed it to a woman I still loved, which is its own particular kind of misery. The roof over the little place I rented in Jonesport had a soft spot the size of a card table, and every time it rained, I put a bucket under it and thought about the $4,000 it'd take to make it stop. I was 46. My hands hurt in the cold now in a way they never used to. I'd started to do the math that every diver eventually does, the math about how many years you've got left before your body files its complaint and won't take it back. So when Denny Sabo called me in the middle of October and said he had a job that paid $30,000 for maybe 2 weeks of work, I let him talk. Denny and I went back to the oil field. He'd been a diver too until a bad blowdown in the Gulf messed up his inner ear and put him topside for good. Now he ran gear, tended umbilicals, sat the comms. There's nobody I trusted more on a wire. When Denny was on the other end of the line, I knew that if something went wrong up top, he would be the last man on that barge to leave his post, and I mean that as the highest thing you can say about a person in this trade. It's a wreck job, he said. Deep, cold, North Atlantic in November, so at least you won't come up looking like a boiled crab. Whose wreck? Private outfit. Fella named Lindquist put it together. He's got the barge, the crane, the whole rig sitting up at a yard in Eastport, and he's got the coordinates on a boat that went down out past the outer ledges in the 50s. He wants something off it. Wants what? Denny was quiet a second on the phone, and I should have listened to that quiet more than I did. Strongbox, he said. Company payroll. She went down before it could be offloaded, and the family that owned the line, they never got their money out. Insurance is long dead. Whatever's in that box is salvage now, and Lindquist bought the rights off a great-grandkid for a song. He just needs a man who can get down there and cut it loose. 190 feet, I said, in the North Atlantic in November. About that, little more maybe. She's sitting deep. I did the thing where I told him no while both of us knew I was going to say yes. I told him I didn't do wreck penetration anymore, which was true. I hadn't gone inside a hull in years, and there's a reason for that. There is nothing in commercial diving that will kill you faster than swimming into a space you can't swim straight up out of. Every rule they beat into you, every man I ever knew who got carried off a barge in a bag, it all comes down to the same thing. You do not go somewhere you can't get out of. But $30,000 was a new roof, and it was Amy's braces, and it was 6 months of not lying awake. and Denny knew the number before he ever dialed me. That's why he'd said it first. "Who else is crewing?" I asked, which is a yes, and we both knew it. Me on the wire. Carl Hutchins runs the barge and the crane, you remember Hutch. And Lindquist's got a boy of his own on the boat. Some tech kid does the sonar and the ROV, that's it. Small and quiet, the way he wants it. Why's he want it quiet? "Russ," Denny said, "when's a man with money ever wanted it loud?" I told him I'd come look at the gear. That was as far as I'd commit to over the phone, but I already knew. I stood in my kitchen with the bucket under the soft spot in the ceiling and the rain coming down out over the water in the dark, and I already knew I was going to go down to that boat. I drove down to Eastport the next morning. It's about an hour and change from Jonesport, down along the coast where the birches were already bare and the Atlantic showed gray through the trees the color of a nickel. The ocean doesn't hold still the way a pond does. It moves like something breathing, slow, up and down against the rocks, in and out with the tide, and on a low gray morning in November it looks like the biggest cold thing in the world, because it is. People who grew up on it will tell you the sea takes what it wants and keeps most of it. They don't say it like a legend. They say it the way you'd say the stove is hot. It's just a fact they grew up next to. What the sea does give back, it gives back ruined, picked apart, weeks later and 40 miles down the coast. If it gives it back at all, nothing stays whole down there. The salt and the cold and the things that live in the dark take a body apart and scatter it, and that's the plain fact of it, and you have to hold that fact in your head before I tell you the rest. Nothing that goes down into that water is supposed to come back up looking like itself. I want you to hold on to that. It matters later. The barge was tied up at a commercial slip past the marina, a flat, ugly thing with a crane on it and a dive shack built onto the deck. And it was newer and better outfitted than anything I expected out of a one-off salvage. That was the first thing that sat funny with me. Lindquist had money, real money, the kind that buys the right gear instead of the cheap gear, and men with that kind of money usually have accountants. And accountants do not sign off on a $30,000 diver to recover a payroll box that might have a few $1,000s of rotted 1950s cash in it. The numbers didn't close. I noticed that they didn't close, and I told myself a story about how rich men are eccentric, and this one probably wanted the box for the history of it, the story of it, a thing to put on a shelf. People with money buy stories all the time. I told myself that, and I let it be enough because I wanted the job. Lindquist himself was on the barge when I came down the gangway. He was older than I'd figured, 70 at least, tall and dry and put together like a man who'd spent his life indoors making decisions. He wore a good wool coat. He shook my hand with a grip that surprised me, and he looked at me a beat too long, the way a man looks at a horse he's thinking about buying. "Mr. Kellett," he said, "Denny tells me you're the best he's worked with. Denny oversells." "I hope not," Lindquist said, and he smiled, and the smile didn't have much in it. "I've waited a long time for the right conditions and the right man. I'd hate to have both wrong. How long you been after this boat?" He looked out at the water when he answered, past the ledges, out to where the ocean went on until it stopped being water in your mind and started being the edge of something. "A very long time," he said. "Longer than you've been alive." I figured that for an old man's way of talking. I let it go. That was the second thing I let go, and I've kept a list, over the years, of the things I let go on that job, and the list is the reason I don't sleep well. The boat was the Cyrus Vale. I hadn't heard the name before, and that surprised me, because I know the wrecks off this coast the way some men know ball players. The Portland, everybody knows. But there's 100 more down there, coasters and coal boats and package freighters, and I'd read about most of them on winter nights when there wasn't work. The Cyrus Vale wasn't in any of my books. Lindquist's tech kid told me why. The kid's name was Aaron, and he couldn't have been more than 25, and he had the pale, soft look of somebody who'd spent his life in front of screens. He ran the sonar and he ran the little ROV, the underwater robot with the cameras that they'd send down first to scout before they ever put a man in the water. He was decent at it. He was also scared of Lindquist in a way I clocked right off, the way a dog is careful around a man who's hit it. and I didn't think much of that yet either. She's not in the records, Aaron told me the first evening, in the dive shack with the space heater going. I looked. Before I took the job, I looked, because that's what I do. I look stuff up. The Cyrus Vale went down November of 1952 out past the outer ledges with 29 men aboard, and there's no wreck report, no newspaper, no insurance filing I could find. It's like the boat got erased. Boats don't get erased. This one did. The only place I found her at all was in the papers Lindquist gave me. He's got the original manifest. He's got a crew list. He's got the last radio position. Aaron looked at the shack door, which was shut, and lowered his voice anyway. He's got a lot of paper for a boat nobody else on Earth seems to know sank. How's he have all that? Aaron shook his head. I asked him that once. He said his family had an interest in the line. The kid rubbed his eyes. He talks about it like it's his. Like it's a personal thing. I told him rich men take everything personal. I was doing a lot of telling people things that fall. They put the ROV down the next morning. The water was flat, and the sky was the color of dirty wool, and it was cold enough on deck that the coffee went lukewarm before you finished it. Hutch worked the crane. Aaron sat in the shack with his screens, and I stood behind him and watched the little robot fall down through the green into the gray, into the black, the depth numbers ticking up on the readout. And I felt the thing I always feel watching a machine go where I'm about to go, a kind of homesickness, if that makes any sense, for a place I hadn't been yet. At 160 feet, the bottom came up on the sonar, and then the boat came up under the ROV's lights, and the whole shack went quiet. She was sitting upright. I need you to understand why that stopped my breath. Boats that go down in a storm out there, they don't land pretty. They break in half, most of them, the way the Portland did. They roll. They go down bow first and drive into the mud and stand on their nose, where they capsize and lie there upside down with their deck in the silt. A freighter 300 and some feet long that sinks in a November gale is a violent thing, a thing torn apart by more force than you can hold in your head. They do not settle onto the bottom sitting level and square like a model on a shelf. The Cyrus Vale was sitting level and square like a model on a shelf. That's wrong, I said. Aaron didn't answer. He was flying the ROV slow along the hull, and the light slid over the plating, and the plating was clean. Not clean like new, clean like undisturbed. There should have been 70 years of the sea crusted over every inch of her, barnacle and blue mussel and kelp and the soft ruin that the salt water grows on anything it gets hold of. The stuff that coats every wreck down there like gray concrete and hangs off it in curtains. The Vale had some patches, but long stretches of her hull were nearly bare, the old paint still showing, the name still legible on the bow when Aaron brought the robot around to it. Cyrus Vale, white letters. You could read them. Those letters should be gone, I said. That paint should be gone. Aaron, that whole boat should be a reef. I know, he said. He said it very quiet. He flew the ROV up the side toward the deck house, and the lights came across the wheelhouse windows, and every one of them was intact, not one broken. Glass that had ridden 300 feet down through a storm that killed 29 men, and not one pane had so much as a crack in it. The robot's lights hit the glass and came back at us as a flat white glare, and for just a second, before Aaron adjusted the camera, I thought I saw something move behind it. I told myself it was the reflection, the ROV's own lights, thrown back. That's what it was. That's what I said out loud, and Aaron nodded fast like a man who wanted very badly to be told that, and behind us the shack door opened and Lindquist stood there in his good coat with the cold coming in around him. And he looked at the screen, at the wheelhouse glass, and he said, "There she is," in a voice with something underneath it I didn't have a word for yet. That was the third thing I let go, the movement behind the glass. I filed it as a reflection, and I went to bed that night in the motel in Eastport, and I slept fine, which is the part I'm least able to forgive myself for now. I slept fine. Here is how a dive like this works, so you understand what I was and wasn't in control of down there. I don't swim around on a scuba tank like a sport diver. On a job that deep, you go surface supplied. That means I wear a hard helmet, a Kirby Morgan, bolted and sealed to a neck dam, and my air comes down from the barge through an umbilical. The umbilical is a bundle of hoses and lines all taped together into one fat cord. There's my air hose. There's a pneumo line they can use to check my depth. There's a hot water hose, because at 36 degrees, a man in a wetsuit is dead in 20 minutes, so I wore a hot water suit instead. A loose suit with tubes sewn through it that pump warm water from a boiler on the barge over your whole body the entire dive. And there's the comms wire, so I can talk to Denny and Denny can talk to me. That umbilical was my life. Every single thing that kept me alive came down that one cord from the barge, and the cord ran up through 200 feet of black water to a man I trusted. That's the only reason a person can make himself do this. You have to trust the cord, and you have to trust the man on the other end of it, or you'd never go over the side. They'd rig a stage to lower me, basically a steel cage open on one side, and drop me down on the crane to the wreck. I'd work off the stage. The plan Lindquist laid out was this. The strongbox was in the purser's office, which was in the aft deckhouse, one deck down from the Maine. Aaron had mapped it with the ROV as best he could through the windows. I'd go in through a cargo hatch they figured had rusted open, drop into the aft hold, cross to an internal door, go up a short companionway to the purser's office, cut the box free of its mount with a hydraulic tool, rig it to a line, and get out the way I came while Hutch hauled the box up separate, in and out. They figured 40 minutes of bottom time, maybe less. Simple, if anything, at that depth and that dark inside a dead ship is ever simple. I didn't like the penetration. I said so, more than once. But Aaron's ROV maps showed the route clear. The hold was open and empty. The door was there. The companionway was there. And I told myself 40 minutes was 40 minutes, and I'd cut the box and be gone. We put in 3 days of setup, rigging the stage, testing the hot water boiler, running comms checks, dropping the ROV twice more to firm up the map. Both those extra ROV runs, something happened, and both times I let it go. And I'm going to tell you about them because by now you know that's the pattern and you should be as sick of my letting things go as I am. The first thing, on the second ROV run, Aaron took the robot in through the cargo hatch to prove the route. The hold was empty, like he'd said. Bare steel, some silt, the old ribs of the hull going up into the dark. But when he turned the robot to come back out, the hatch was harder to find than it should have been, and when the lights finally caught it, there was a mark on the frame. Scratches. Long parallel scratches in the steel, 4 of them, bright where the rest of the metal was dull, like something had been dragged across it, or had dragged itself. Aaron froze the frame and we both looked at it and he said, "Current does that. Debris gets pushed around, scrapes things." And I said, "Yeah, current." That's what I said. There is tide out there, real tide, the kind that rips over the ledges and can pin a diver against a hull if he times it wrong. But there is no current that reaches inside a sealed hold at 190 feet to drag 4 bright lines down a steel frame, and I knew that, and I said current anyway, because the other options weren't things I was willing to hold in my mind and still get in the water. The second thing was worse, and I almost quit over it, and I want that on the record, that I almost quit, because it's the only thing I did right the whole job and I still didn't do it. Third ROV run, last one before my dive. Aaron flew the robot up to the wheelhouse to get one more look at the deck layout. The lights came across those intact windows again, all that unbroken glass, and this time he didn't rush the camera past it. He held it there, and in the glass, lit up flat and white by the ROV's lamps, plain as anything, was a face. Not a reflection. A reflection is your own light thrown back. This was inside the glass, behind it, in the dark of the wheelhouse where no light was. A man's face, pale, the skin gone, the gray-white that skin goes in that cold water, looking out, looking at the camera, mouth a little open, eyes open. and it did not have the slack ruin of a drowned man. It had an expression. It was waiting, and it had been waiting a long time, and it had heard us coming. Aaron made a sound. Hutch was in the shack by then, and Hutch said, "Turn it, turn the light off it," and Aaron did. He swung the ROV away so fast he clipped the deck house and lost a prop guard. And when he brought it back around under control, the window was just a window. Dark, empty, the way it should be. He held the camera on it a long time. Nobody was there. Nobody had been there. That's what I told myself. I went outside on the barge deck and I stood in the cold with my heart going, and I called Denny over and I told him I wanted out. I said it plain. "Denny," I said, "there's a man's face in that wheelhouse, and that boat should be a reef, and it's sitting up square on the bottom like something set it down, and I've got a bad feeling I can't talk myself out of, and I want to go home." Denny didn't laugh at me. That's the thing about Denny. He looked out at the water and he was quiet the way he'd been quiet on the phone the first day, and then he said, "It was a body, Russ. There's 29 of them down there. That deep, that cold, no light, no air. Things slow way down. A body can hold together longer than you'd think in water that cold. One of them drifted up against the glass. That's all. That's all it was. And the hell of it is that made sense. It made perfect, terrible sense. Of course there were bodies. 29 men, preserved in that cold, wearing whatever they'd been wearing in 1952, sitting in the dark exactly as young as the day they drowned. Of course one had drifted up against the wheelhouse glass. That was the reasonable answer, and it was probably even true, and I took it. I took it like a drowning man takes a rope, because I did not want to give back $30,000, and I did not want to be the diver who quit over a dead man's face. I took the reasonable answer and I put my name back on the job. But a body doesn't have an expression. A body doesn't look like it's waiting. I knew that. I've pulled enough of them out of enough cold water to know exactly what a drowned face does and doesn't do. And what I'd seen in that glass was waiting. I went anyway. The night before the dive, I couldn't sleep, and neither could Aaron, and we ended up in the tavern down the hill from the motel, the one that stays open past the season for the locals. Denny came too, and then left early to check the boiler one more time, which was Denny all over. And it was just me and the kid in a back booth with a couple of beers going warm the way beers do when nobody's drinking them because nobody's really there for the beer. Aaron had his laptop. He'd been in Lindquist's paper again, the manifest and the crew list, and he had that look people get when they found a thing they wish they hadn't. He turned the screen to me. It was a scan of the old crew list of the Cyrus Vale, typed on a machine with a baddie, 29 names down the page in a column, ranks next to them, and about a third of the way down his finger stopped on one. "Peter Lindquist," he said. "Ordinary seaman, 19 years old." I looked at the name, and I looked at the kid, and I didn't say anything, because I could see he wasn't done. "Our Lindquist," Aaron said. "The old man. His first name's Peter, too. It's on the barge documents. Peter Lindquist. Same as the kid on the boat." He scrolled. I thought, okay, family name, they hand it down, grandfather to grandson, whatever. So I went looking for our guy. Birth records, property, the usual. And there's nothing before about 1955. He shows up owning a shipping interest in 1955. A grown man, out of nowhere. No birth certificate I can find. No school. No war record. Nothing. A man doesn't come from nowhere at 40 years old, Russ. Except this one did, right after the boat went down. I told him records from back then are a mess. Half of them burned in some courthouse fire. Half of them never kept right in the first place. I told him he was tired and reaching. I did a lot of telling that fall, and every word of it was me building a little wall between myself and a thing I could already half see over the top of. Maybe, Aaron said. He didn't believe me and he wanted to. But here's the part I keep chewing on. Why's a man spend 70 years and God knows how much money to get back to a boat that his own kid died on, or his brother, or whoever Peter was to him? You'd think he'd want to stay as far from it as a man could get. Instead, he buys a barge and a crane and hires the best diver Denny knows, and he's out here in November on the worst water in the country trying to open it up. The kid looked at me across the warm beer. That's not grief. Grief runs the other way. That's a man trying to get to something, or send something. He talks about that box like it's a door. I remember the tavern was warm and loud and ordinary. A couple of old boys at the bar arguing about the Patriots. A woman running the taps who'd known everybody in that room since they were kids. Snow starting up outside the black windows, and I remember feeling the cold of that water anyway, right there in that warm room, the way you feel a draft from a door open somewhere in a house you thought was shut. I should have listened to the kid. He was 25 and scared and right, and I was 46 and broke, and I'd already decided, and there is no fool on earth like a man who has already decided. Get some sleep, I told him. I dive at 9. Yeah, Aaron said, and he closed the laptop, and neither one of us moved to leave for a while. We dove on a Thursday morning. The swell had laid down overnight and the water was near flat, the sky low, and the air had that iron smell it gets before the first snow. Under the salt and the weed and the mud-flat smell the tide leaves when it's out. I remember standing on the deck in the hot water suit with the crew getting me dressed in, the barge lifting slow under my boots on what was left of the swell. And I remember the smell of the boiler exhaust and the coffee and the salt drying white and crusty on the umbilical and the cold coming off the water, and I remember thinking that it was a good morning to not go anywhere. That's the last ordinary thought I had. Denny sealed the helmet down over my head and the world got small and loud, just my own breathing and Denny's voice in my ear, and I stepped onto the stage and Hutch took the slack out of the crane and swung me out over the side. "Comms check," Denny said. "How you hear me, Russ?" "Loud and clear. You got good gas, good water, boiler's happy. You feel that heat all right?" I felt it, the warm water coming through the suit against my chest and down my arms. Feels good. "All right, taking you down. Nice and easy." The stage went down and the water came up, the faceplate, green and then greener, and the deck of the barge slid away above me and turned into a wobbling square of gray light. Then that was gone too. I went down through the green into the place where the green gives up. You lose the light in stages. First the reds go, then everything warm. Then you're in a blue-gray world with no shadows, and then even that thins out and the only light in the world is the one bolted to your helmet. The depth gauge on my wrist climbed, 60 feet, 90. The pressure came on my ears and I cleared them, 120. The cold pressed in against the warm water in my suit, not touching me, but I could feel it out there, patient, waiting for a hose to kink or a pump to fail. "Passing 140, I said. "Copy 140. Bottom's at 192 on the fathometer. Wreck deck's about 170. You'll see her soon." Denny's voice was the only human thing in the world. Let me tell you what that does to you. Everything you can see is the little cone of your own light, and the umbilical trailing up out of it into black. Everything you can hear is your breath, and the tick of the regulator and the burble of your exhaust. And then there's this voice, calm, dry, right next to your ear, a man sitting in a warm shack 200 feet straight up with a cup of coffee. And that voice is the whole reason you don't come apart. I've heard divers say the comms wire is more important than the air hose. They don't mean it literal. They mean that a man alone in that dark, truly alone, with no voice, would lose his mind before he lost his air. The wreck came up under me like a wall. The stage dropped past the rail and the deck of the Cyrus Vale spread out beneath my boots, and my light ran across it, and even braced for it. Even after the ROV, it stopped me cold. The deck was clean. Old, but clean. The wood of the hatch cover still there, dark and swollen, but there, when 70 years should have eaten it to nothing. The rigging still up. A coil of line by the aft mast still coiled, still lying the way some deckhand had left it before the storm. It didn't look like a wreck. It looked like a boat that had been set down on the bottom of the sea with everybody sent below, a boat waiting for its crew to come back up and cast off. My light found a coffee cup lying on its side by a bulkhead, white enamel with a blue rim, and it hadn't broken and it hadn't washed away, and I thought about the man who set it down, and I made myself stop thinking about him. "I'm on deck," I said. "Denny, this deck is intact. I'm looking at a coffee cup that didn't break." A pause. "Copy. You're there to work, Russ. Eyes on the job. Where's your hatch?" Good old Denny. Eyes on the job. I found the cargo hatch aft, the one Aaron had mapped, and it was open. The cover slid back into its track, a black rectangle in the clean deck about 4 feet on a side. My light went down into it and found nothing to land on, just black. I'm at the hatch, going to have a look before I go in. I got down on the deck and put my helmet over the opening and shined my light down. The hold went down maybe 15 feet to a silt floor, and I could see the ribs of the hull curving away on both sides. And across the bottom, the ROV's route led to a dark doorway in the forward bulkhead of the compartment, empty, just like the map. I pulled the excess umbilical down after me so it wouldn't snag on the hatch lip, and I told Denny I was going in, and Denny said, "Copy, watch your umbilical," and I went down into the Cyrus Veil. The thing about going inside a wreck is the light dies different. Out in open water, your light just runs out into the distance. Inside, it bounces. It hits the walls and the ceiling and comes back at you as a dull gray glow that shows you a room and then eats itself. The hold closed over me. My exhaust bubbles, which outside had run straight up and gone, now hit the ceiling of the compartment and gathered there and ran along the underside of the deck in a shivering silver skin, looking for a way out. Not finding one, that's a bad thing to see. Your own breath, trapped up against the ceiling, unable to leave the room you're in. It means you're in a place air can't get out of. It means you're in a place you can't get out of, not fast, not straight up, and every part of a working diver's training screams at him about that. "I'm in the hold," I said. My voice sounded wrong in the helmet, tight. "Floor's silt. I'm going to cross to the door." "Copy. Take it slow. How's your umbilical running?" I looked back and up at the cord trailing behind me to the pale square of the hatch. Clear. It's clear. I crossed the hold. The silt came up in slow clouds where my boots touched down and hung there, and I moved careful so I wouldn't black the water out entirely. Halfway across, my light caught something on the floor off to the left, half in the silt, and I put the beam on it because you can't not, and it was a boot. A work boot, leather, laces still tied, and it was standing upright on the silt like a man had just stepped out of it. It was too far to see if there was anything in it. I didn't go look. And I'll own that too, that I didn't go look, that there are some things a man can decide not to know, and I decided not to know that one. "You go quiet on me," Denny said. "Talk to me, Russ." "I'm here. There's gear down here. Boot on the floor. It's fine. I'm at the door." The door in the forward bulkhead was open, a low steel doorway with the dogging levers rusted back, and beyond it the ROV had shown a short passage, and then the companionway up to the purser's office. I put my light through it. Passage, just like the map. But at the far end of the passage, where the companionway should go up, my light showed something the ROV hadn't shown, or hadn't shown me, and I stood in that doorway with my breath roaring in my ears and looked at it. There was a light down there, not mine, a dim, greenish, steady light coming from up the companionway, from the direction of the purser's office. It didn't flicker like something failing. It didn't move. It just sat there, the color of a watch face in a dark room, coming down the stairs from a compartment inside a dead ship where there had been no power for 70 years. "Denny," I said, and I heard my own voice do the thing I'd heard other men's voices do on the wire right before everything went bad. That climb, that thinness. "Denny, there's a light down here." There was a long pause on the wire, longer than I wanted. When Denny came back, his voice was careful, level, the voice he used when he was worried and didn't want me to hear it. "Say again, Russ. A light." "Up the companionway, coming from where the box is. It's steady, green. It's not my lamp." I heard myself breathing too fast and I made myself slow it down. In through the nose, hold, out. Panic eats your gas and panic kills you at depths surer than anything in the water. Denny, there's no power on this boat. I heard him take a breath. Then, off the mic, faint, I heard him say something to somebody, and I heard another voice answer, and I knew that was Lindquist, because Lindquist had been in the shack the whole dive. And Lindquist had not said one word until now. Denny came back on. Lindquist says that's expected. That's expected. His words. He says the box has a... hang on. Muffled talk. He says there's material in the box that phosphoresces, glows. Been down there in the dark so long it took on a charge, some kind of mineral thing. He says go get the box, Russ. It's just the box you're seeing. Now I have been lied to by employers my whole working life, and I have a good ear for it. And that was a lie built fast by a man who was surprised and thinking on his feet. Minerals don't glow steady in the pitch dark after 70 years. Nothing does. There is no material you put in a strongbox that lights up a stairwell. Lindquist knew what that light was, and it wasn't a surprise to him, and the only thing he was surprised about was that I could see it. He'd expected the box. He had not expected me to describe the light before I ever reached it. I should have gone up. Right then, I had every reason, and I'd already used up my one act of good sense back on the barge. But I was inside the boat now, and the box was 40 feet away, and $30,000 was on the other side of one dim green stairwell, and I did the thing that men in my trade die doing. I decided I could get in and out before whatever I was afraid of could matter. Going up the companionway, I said. Copy. Denny said, and I could hear he didn't like it, and I could hear he wasn't going to say so with Lindquist standing over him. Talk to me the whole way. Don't you go quiet. I went through the door and down the passage, pulling my umbilical along, feeding it careful so it wouldn't hang up on the doorframe behind me. That cord was getting long now, a lot of it trailing back through the hold and up out the hatch. A lot of length to snag. And every foot I went deeper into the boat was a foot of it laid out behind me in the dark like a thread in a maze. I kept one hand on it. You keep one hand on your umbilical inside a wreck. It's how you come home. You follow it back hand over hand even if your light dies, even if the silk blacks you out, even if you've forgotten which way is which. The umbilical always knows the way out. That was the rule. Hold the cord. The companionway went up in a quarter turn, 5 or 6 steel steps, and the green light got stronger as I climbed, and I came up into the purser's office, and I stood in it and I forgot for a second to breathe. It was a small steel room, a desk built against one wall, cabinets, a chair still bolted to the deck, and on the desk, mounted in a steel frame the way Lindquist had said, was the box. It was bigger than I'd pictured, the size of a footlocker, dull metal, and the green light was coming from it, from the seams of it, leaking out around the lid in thin, steady lines like there was a cold green fire shut up inside. The light lay over the whole room. It lay over the walls and the desk and the chair, and it lay over the man sitting in the chair. He was there. He'd been there the whole time, sitting at the desk with his back to me, and in the green light I could see the wet, dark wool of his coat and the pale skin of the back of his neck and his hair, still combed, still parted, and his hands were flat on the desk on either side of the box like a man waiting for a meal to be served. He did not move, he did not turn, but the water in that room was not still around him. There was a slow drift to it, coming off him, coming toward me, and it carried a smell that got into my helmet somehow, past the seals, past the gas, which is not possible. A smell like cold pennies and wet wool and something under that, something sweet and old, the smell of a thing that had been kept a long time and never allowed to finish rotting. Denny, I said, just his name. I couldn't get anything else out. I'm here. What is it? Talk to me. There's a man in the chair. The wire went dead quiet, not static, quiet. The particular quiet of everybody in a room at the other end deciding at the same moment not to speak. Then Denny, very soft, not careful anymore, just my friend. Russ, come out. Leave the box. Come out right now. Follow your umbilical. I'm bringing you up. And Lindquist's voice came over the top of him, loud, the first time I'd heard it on the wire, sharp and hungry and not old-sounding at all. No, Kellett, listen to me. Do not come up without the box. You cut that box loose and you rig it and you send it up. Do you hear me? That is the job. That is the only job. The man in the chair moved. Not all at once. His right hand came up off the desk, slow, the fingers coming up first and then the whole hand, water sliding off it, and it turned in the green light. And it settled on the lid of the box like he was resting it there, like a man laying his hand on a Bible, and then his head began to turn. It turned on his neck too far and too smooth, the way a thing turns when the joints that should stop it have been gone a long time, and I saw the side of his face come around, gray-white. The cheek fallen in a little, the eye already showing before the face was even halfway to me, and the eye was open and it was wet and it was looking at me, and it was the face from the wheelhouse glass. The waiting face, and it had waited 70 years, and it had waited 3 days more since it heard the ROV, and now it had what it was waiting for. Its mouth opened, and through my helmet, through the gas, through 200 feet of water, in a voice that was not coming over the comms because it was coming through the water itself, I heard it say my name. Not a name, my name, Russ. I don't remember deciding to move. I've tried to put that part back together a lot of times and there's a hole in it. 1 second I was standing in that green room with the thing in the chair turning its face to me and saying my name, and the next I was back in the passage with my light swinging wild and my hand tearing along the umbilical, hauling myself toward the hold, and Denny was in my ear saying my name too, saying it over and over. Easy, Russ, easy. Follow the cord. I've got you. Follow the cord. Here is the thing nobody who hasn't done it understands. You cannot run underwater. Your whole body wants to. Everything old and animal in you is screaming to sprint, to claw, to get up and get away, and the water won't let you. You move at the speed the water allows and no faster, and behind you a thing that has all the time in the world is coming at exactly the speed it chooses. And the gap between how fast you need to go and how fast you can go is the worst feeling a human body can have. My breath was a freight train. My gas was going fast, and some far-off calm part of me knew it and could not make the rest of me care. I got to the door out of the passage and my umbilical came up short. It had snagged. Back behind me, somewhere in the dark I'd come through, the cord had hung up on something, the door frame or the desk mount or God knows, and it stopped me hard, jerked me back by the helmet. And for one white instant I was a fish on a line. I could not go forward. The one thing that was going to save me, the cord I was supposed to follow home, had become the thing holding me in the boat with it. I'm fouled, I said, and I didn't recognize my own voice. Denny, my umbilical's fouled. I can't. I'm stuck. I'm stuck in here. Okay. Stop pulling. Russ, stop pulling. You'll part a hose. Stop. Denny's voice was iron now, no shake in it at all, and I clung to it. Turn around. You gotta go back toward the snag to clear it. I know you don't want to. You go back a few feet, you find where it's hung, you flip it clear, and then you come home. I've done this, you've done this. Turn around. Turn around. Toward the green light, toward the room, toward the chair. I turned around. The light was coming down the companionway into the passage now. Brighter, and it was moving, not flickering. Rising and falling, slow, like something breathing was carrying it, and I understood that the thing in the chair was not in the chair anymore, that it had gotten up, that it was coming down the stairs with the box's green glow washing ahead of it, and I put my light down along my umbilical and found the snag. It was 10 feet back, 10 feet toward the light. The cord had wrapped the base of the door frame dog, a rusted lever sticking out, and it was cinched there, and to clear it I had to go to it. I have thought a lot about the man I was in those 10 feet. I went. I don't know how. I went hand over hand back along my own lifeline toward a thing that wanted me, and I got to the snag, and I worked the cord off the lever with fingers I couldn't feel. And the green light came down the companionway and spilled into the passage and lit the water up around me the color of a drowned watch, and I did not look up. I got the cord clear. I felt it come free, and a hand closed on my ankle. I'm not going to dress it up. It closed on my ankle over the boot, cold coming through the hot water suit, through the heat, a cold that went up my leg and into my gut like I'd been dropped through the ice, and it pulled. Not hard. That was the worst of it, that it wasn't a violent yank. It was patient, a slow, steady draw backward toward the green room, the pull of a thing that had never once in 70 years been in a hurry. Because where was I going to go? Because it had all the time there was, and I had maybe 200 psi of gas in a body that would quit in that cold in minutes. And it knew that. It knew exactly how much time I had. And it was content to simply hold my ankle and wait for the sea to do the rest. I kicked back with my other boot at where the hand was, and I hit something that gave like cold meat and did not let go. And I heard myself screaming in the helmet. And Denny was screaming too now. No iron left. Just Russ, what's happening, Russ? And up top somewhere, a long way away, I heard the barge. I heard through the wire the sounds of the surface, Hutch yelling, a diesel, and under all of it, coming down the comms from 200 feet up, I heard Lindquist. He was not afraid. That's what I remember. Every other voice on that wire was coming apart, and Lindquist's was steady and low and almost tender, and he was not talking to me. He was talking to the thing that had my ankle. He was saying a name I didn't know, over and over, the way you'd call a dog back, the way you'd call a child, and the name was Peter. He was saying, Peter, Peter, it's all right. I sent you a man. And I understood in that flooded second more than I have ever wanted to understand about why the money was too good and why the boat wasn't in any record and why an old man had waited longer than I'd been alive. He hadn't hired me to bring up a box. The box was the bait. I was the delivery. He'd been trying to send something down to that boat for 70 years, and I was what he'd finally managed to send. I carried a knife. Every working diver does, strapped to the leg, because the day you need it is the day the whole thing has already gone wrong and you don't have time to wish you'd worn it. Mine was on my right calf, and the hand had my right ankle, and I bent down into the pull, folded myself down against the thing that was holding me. Close enough that the green light showed me the arm coming out of the dark, the sleeve of the coat, the wrist, the hand around my boot with the fingers gone thin and gray and too long. And I got the knife out of the sheath, and I did not think about what I was cutting. I put the blade against the wrist and I sawed. It didn't bleed. I want you to know that. There was no blood, and there was no give like meat gives when you mean it. There was a resistance like cutting into a candle, cold and dense and wrong. And while I cut, the hand did not tighten and it did not thrash. It kept its patient pull. And up the length of that arm, in the green light, the face came down close to my faceplate, and it looked at me through the glass the way it had looked at the ROV, and its mouth moved, and it was not angry. And that was the thing that has never left me. It was not angry. It looked at me the way a man looks at a door that's stuck. A thing in its way. A thing that would open if it was patient. And it said my name again, gentle, Russ. And behind the glass its eyes were wet and open and older than the boat. And I felt the knife go through the last of the wrist, and the hand came off my ankle, still holding on, still closed around nothing, and I fell back away from it and got my boots under me, and I ran the way you run in water, which is to say I hauled myself along that umbilical hand over hand with everything I had left, out the door, into the hold. I'm clear. I'm in the hold. Get me up, Denny. Get me up. Get me up. Coming up. Hold on. Hutch, take him up. I felt the umbilical come taut from above, felt Hutch put the crane on it and the slack go out of my stage line. And I got to the middle of that black hold with the silt boiling up around me and the light gone brown and my own bubbles trapped and shivering on the ceiling, and I looked up at the hatch. That pale gray square of open water above me, the way out, and it was so far, 15 feet, that was a mile, and the green light was coming out of the passage behind me into the hold and rising. I got under the hatch, I got my hands on the lip of it, and the stage line pulled me up out of the Cyrus Vale into open water, and the deck of the wreck dropped away beneath my boots, that clean, impossible deck with the coiled line and the coffee cup, and the green light stayed down inside the hatch, down inside the boat, and did not follow me out. It stopped at the hatch. Whatever it was, it belonged to the boat, and it could not leave the boat, and I have thanked God for that particular mercy more times than for anything else in my life. It could take a man who came inside. It could not come out and get one who didn't. Denny brought me up slow. That's what people don't think about. You can't just haul a man up from 190 feet, not after the bottom time I put in, or the pressure that's soaked into your blood comes out of solution like the fizz when you crack a bottle. And it kills you, or cripples you, the bends, and it doesn't care that there's a dead thing in the water under you. So Denny did his job. He was a professional, and he was my friend, and he did the hardest thing, which was to bring me up at the speed the tables allowed and not 1 foot faster, to make me hang there on the stage in the dark at 70 feet, and then at 40 feet, and then at 20 feet, decompressing, doing my stops, while every cell in my body wanted to bolt for the surface. I hung on that stage in the open water, and I watched the black below me for the green light, and it did not come. And Denny talked to me the whole time, easy, steady, telling me about nothing, about his boat, about a fish he caught, about anything, keeping a voice in my ear so I didn't come apart hanging there in all that dark with what I knew was down there underneath me. It took the better part of 2 hours to bring me up, 2 hours hanging in the cold water over that boat, doing math with my life. By the time Hutch swung the stage up over the rail and Denny got the helmet off me, I was hypothermic and my hands had quit working and I was crying, I think, though the water on your face down there. You can't ever really tell after. Denny had his arms around me on the deck. I remember that. I remember the good clean smell of the diesel and the salt and the cold air and Denny's coat, and I remember the taste of the sea on my own lips where the spray had come over the rail, salt and iron, the taste of being alive and up top, and I remember the sky was spitting the first snow, tiny hard flakes coming down out of the gray onto the black water, and I remember thinking it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, the surface of the world, the plain gray daylight, the snow. Lindquist was gone. He'd gone over the side. That's what Hutch and Aaron pieced together, though nobody saw the moment of it in the chaos of getting me up. Sometime while Denny was fighting to bring me back, while the wire was full of screaming, the old man had walked to the rail in his good wool coat and stepped off the barge into 200 feet of 40-degree water. And he had not come up, and he did not come up. The Coast Guard dragged for him for 3 days and never found him, which around these waters surprises nobody, because the sea keeps what it takes. But I know they were dragging the wrong water. I know they should have been looking straight down. I know exactly where that old man went, and I know he went to it gladly. And I know there was somebody down there he'd been trying to reach for 70 years, somebody named Peter. And I hope to God they don't look anything alike anymore, for the old man's sake. Though I expect down there in that cold Peter looks exactly the way he did the day the Cyrus Vale went down in Lindquist. Whoever he really was, whatever he really was to that boy, does not. The rest is the kind of thing that gets a file number and then gets forgotten. The Coast Guard came. There was an investigation, because a man died, or vanished, which is the same thing on paper. I told them what happened up to a point. I told them about the dive, the box, the snag, the panic, the old man going over the side. I did not tell them about the light, or the hand, or the face, or the voice saying my name, because I wanted to keep my license and my mind, and a man who says those things on a report gets to keep neither. They wrote it down as an accident with a suicide attached, an old man's last strange rich man's errand gone wrong, a diver who got fouled and lucky, and they closed it. Aaron gave them the ROV drives. Denny gave them the comms log. Nobody ever asked me the one question I was afraid of. which was how a thing at the bottom of the sea knew my name, and I have decided the reason nobody asked is that the answer isn't on any of the drives. The comms log has Lindquist saying Peter over and over. It does not have the other voice. That voice never came over the wire. It came through the water, and the wire didn't record the water, and so the only recording of the Cyrus Vale saying Russ Kellett is the one I carry, and it plays at night, and it does not need power any more than that green light did. Aaron quit the trade. Last I heard, he sells cars downstate and does not go near the water, and I don't blame him, and I hope it's working. Hutch retired the next spring. Denny and I don't talk about it, not because we're avoiding it, but because there's nothing to say that helps. And the one time we tried, out on his porch with a couple of warm beers, we both just went quiet and looked out at the water, and after a while Denny said, "You did everything right down there, Russ." And I said, "No, I didn't." I went in, and Denny didn't argue, because he's honest, and that was the end of us talking about it. I got the money. That's the part that makes me sick, and I'm going to tell you anyway, because leaving it out would be a lie, and I'm done letting things go. Lindquist had put the $30,000 in an account with instructions to release it on completion, and his lawyer, a dry man downstate who clearly knew more than he let on and wanted the whole thing off his desk, decided the job was complete enough, on account of I'd reached the box and it wasn't my fault I didn't bring it up, and the money came through. I put a new roof on the place in Jonesport. I paid down what I owed Colleen. Amy got her braces. I used the money that a dead man paid to send me to a thing at the bottom of the sea, and it fixed my roof, and my daughter has a straight smile now. And I have to live with the fact that both those things are true at the same time. I don't dive anymore. I tell people it's my hands, the cold, the years, and that's true enough that nobody looks closer. But the truth is, I can't put a helmet on. I tried, once, about a year after, a nothing job, an intake screen at the mill in 12 feet of muddy water where you couldn't see the length of your own arm. And Denny sealed the helmet down over my head and the world got small and loud, just my own breathing coming back at me. And I heard it, the breathing, too close, and under it I waited for the other thing, the voice, and I could not make myself go over the side. I sat on the edge of that little boat in 12 feet of brown river water and I could not do it. Denny took the helmet off without a word and drove me home. He's never asked me to try again. There's a mark on my ankle, where the hand was. 4 thin lines, gone white and smooth like an old burn, that the doctor says is probably from the boot. Pressure, cold, poor circulation, some ordinary thing, and I let him say it. Because I've learned there's no percentage in the truth with certain people. 4 lines, they don't hurt, but the ankle is cold. Always, a little, even in July, even in the shower with the water as hot as I can stand it. There's a coldness in that ankle that goes up into my leg when I'm falling asleep. And some nights it's just a cold ankle, and some nights it feels like fingers, patient, not pulling, just resting there, the way a man rests his hand on a door he knows will open if he waits. I still live up here. People ask me why, if it's so bad, why I don't move somewhere with no big water, Arizona, somewhere, and I've thought about it. But the thing is, I know where it is now. That's worth something. I know the Cyrus Vale is sitting square and clean on the bottom out past the outer ledges with its lights on. It's one green light, and I know what's in it is in it and can't come out. And I'd rather be an hour from a thing I can see on a chart than 1,000 miles from a thing I've decided to forget. Forgetting is how it gets you. Lindquist forgot for a while, I bet, over 70 years. Forgot and remembered and forgot. And every time he remembered, it pulled him a little closer to the rail, and one gray morning with the first snow coming down, it pulled him over. So I don't forget. I keep the list. Everything I let go on that job, I keep it, and I take it out at night, and I look at it, and it keeps me honest, and it keeps me on land. The sea's out there right now, past my window, gray and heaving, and going on past anything I can see, working slow at the rocks the way it always has, taking what it wants. First snow came early again this year. I stood on the porch this morning with my coffee and the salt on the wind, and I watched the snow come down onto the black water and disappear, each flake gone the second it touched, and my ankle was cold. And somewhere out past the outer ledges, 200 feet down in the dark that comes after gray, a green light was burning that has never once gone out. And a man in a wet wool coat was sitting in a bolted chair with his hands flat on a box, patient, in no hurry at all, waiting for the next one to come inside.